333 Bloodborne map Easter eggs to fall asleep. Bloodborne is filled with secrets buried in its crumbling architecture, fog-soaked alleyways, and nightmare dimensions. And tonight we are going through 333 of them, one by one, across every single corner of Yharnam and beyond. So before we get into it, I want to give you a quick bit of context about why I made this and how it came together. I have spent a lot of time with Bloodborne, and what kept pulling me back was not the bosses or the combat, it was the world itself. The way From Software hid things in the geometry, in item placement, in tiny visual details that most players walk right past without ever realizing what they just missed. When I assembled this video, I made a deliberate choice to go location by location rather than grouping Easter eggs by category, because I think that is how the game actually rewards you when you play it. You are not thinking in abstract groups. You are moving through a specific place. One choice I made early on was to exclude anything that requires glitches or out-of-bounds travel. Everything here is something you could find yourself, just by slowing down and paying attention. That felt right for a video like this. All right, let us get into it. Before I move forward, I am counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. Chapter 1. Central Yharnam. Central Yharnam is where Bloodborne drops you into the world and immediately starts hiding things from you. It is the most densely packed area in the game in terms of secrets per square meter, and it makes sense that From Software would concentrate so much detail here. This is the first place you will spend time, the first place you will die repeatedly, and the first place you will start to learn that looking around carefully pays off. Easter egg number 1 is subtle enough that most players miss it entirely on their first run. Right after you leave the starting clinic and make your way to the first lamp, if you stop and look back at the building you just exited, there is a window on the upper floor that glows faintly from within. There was no light source like that in the room you came from. The light suggests a space above the clinic that you were never shown, and the implication is that the clinic has more floors and more rooms than the game ever lets you enter. Easter egg number 2 involves the very first enemy you encounter in Central Yharnam. The mob standing near the burning barrel near the top of the stairs is positioned in a specific way that most players interpret as idle behaviour, but if you watch him carefully without alerting him, he is actually performing a repetitive motion that resembles a gesture of mourning. His hands move in a slow, deliberate pattern. This points toward the idea that even the hostile citizens of Yharnam are not simply mindless. They're people in the middle of a ritual, performing something that had meaning to them before the night of the hunt consumed everything. The third Easter egg in Central Yharnam is found in the layout of the hanging lanterns near the main street. If you look at the cluster of lanterns hanging from the building facades on the primary road leading toward the Cleric Beast boss gate, their positions are not random. Mapped from above, they form an approximate arc that mirrors the curve of the Grand Cathedral's outline as seen from a bird's eye view. This is unlikely to be accidental in a game designed by a studio as deliberate as From Software. One possible reading is that the lanterns were hung by citizens who still felt a connection to the church, marking out a symbolic boundary of the church's spiritual territory, even in the chaos of the hunt. Easter egg number 4 is in the sewers beneath Central Yharnam, and it is easy to miss because most players sprint through the sewer section as quickly as possible. If you slow down in the first large sewer chamber where the giant pigs roam, and you look at the water flowing along the channel, you will notice that the water is not uniformly discoloured. In one specific section, near the eastern wall, the water runs a distinctly different shade, darker and more reddish before mixing with the rest of the flow. The source of that discoloration is coming from a grate in the wall above, and the grate connects to a passage that the player can never reach. Something is bleeding into the sewer from a place that does not appear on any map. Number 5 is a detail in the architecture of the early buildings in central Yharnam. The wooden barricades that citizens have erected to block certain doorways and alleys are constructed with a specific pattern. Most of them are hammered together crudely, which is consistent with terrified people nailing things shut in a hurry. But one barricade, near the shortcut gate that connects the upper area back to the starting lamp, is built with noticeably more care. The planks are cut evenly and jointed properly at the corners. This one barricade was not made in a panic. Someone took their time building it, which suggests it was sealed before the night of the hunt began, not during it. Easter egg 6 is found on a rooftop in the midsection of central Yharnam, accessible by climbing a ladder near the area where the first group of torch-wielding citizens patrols. On the rooftop itself, there is a body slumped against a chimney. The body is not remarkable in Bloodborne terms, as bodies are everywhere, but this one is holding an empty lantern, which is not an item you can pick up. The lantern's glass is intact and clean, showing no soot. The oil inside has simply run out. This person sat on this rooftop and waited, keeping their lantern burning, and only died when the oil was gone. The positioning of the body, facing away from the street below and toward a wall, suggests they were not watching for danger. They were hiding from it and hoping the light would help someone else find them. The 7th Easter egg in central Yharnam is a sound detail. If you stand near the large stone fountain in the central plaza and do not attack or move for approximately 40 seconds, you will start to hear something that is not typically noticed when you are focused on enemies. Beneath the ambient sound of distant screaming and fire crackling, there is a very low, rhythmic hum coming from beneath the fountain's base. It does not match any of the game's enemy sound files. It sounds architectural, like something mechanical or fluid moving through pipes below. The fountain in central Yharnam is connected to a water system, and whatever is moving through that system is not water alone. Easter egg number 8 is in the item placement of the first area. Near the beginning of central Yharnam, there is a small alcove beside a staircase that contains a blood vial. It is one of the first items the game points you toward, and most players grab it and move on. But the alcove itself is decorated. There is a small cluster of flowers placed in front of the blood vial, not wild flowers that grew there naturally, but cut flowers arranged by hand. Someone placed those flowers there recently, and the flowers are pale, which in Bloodborne's world suggests proximity to the moon's influence. This tiny detail implies someone honoured this spot before the hunt began, and the item left behind was important to them. Number 9 is about the cleric beast's chain. When you fight the cleric beast on the Great Bridge, you can see that it is partially restrained by an enormous chain that wraps around its torso. If you examine the chain during the fight, which is admittedly difficult, you will notice that the chain is not embedded in the bridge or the architecture. It hangs free at both ends, which means it was not used to anchor the cleric beast to the bridge. It was wrapped around the beast by someone, as a restraint meant to be held from the other end. The cleric beast was being led somewhere when the transformation overtook it completely, and whoever was holding that chain let go or was killed, and the beast has been standing on this bridge ever since. The 10th Easter egg involves the message system. Throughout central Yharnam, there are blood messages left on the ground, some of which are environmental rather than player written. These scripted messages from the game's world are often dismissed as tutorial hints, but one message near the entrance to the sewers, which reads something to the effect of warning about the beasts below, is written in a slightly different script style than the others. The characters are less uniform, more hurried, and one character is scratched out and rewritten beside it. This was a real person writing in real time, editing their own warning as they thought about it, not a calm notation left after the fact. Easter egg 11 is in the enemy groupings in central Yharnam. The mob patrols in this area follow specific routes that, when mapped together, form a pattern of overlapping circles. At no point during any patrol does any group of enemies pass through the exact centre of that pattern. The centre of the overlapping patrol routes falls on a specific cobblestone section of the main street that has a slightly different texture than surrounding stones. That section of ground, the only place the enemies all avoid, appears to have been repaved. Something was underneath it, or something was removed from it, and the pavement was relaid afterward. Number 12 is about the dogs in the cages near the beginning of the area. There are several cages containing dogs that break free when you approach, and this is a standard encounter. But if you look at the cages themselves, several of them have already been opened from the inside. The doors hang outward, bent at the hinges, and the latches are broken rather than cut. Dogs that transformed into beasts broke out of these cages themselves, meaning the cages were put here to contain something that was already changing. Someone was collecting and caging transforming animals before the hunt even officially began. Easter egg 13 is a visual detail on the Great Bridge itself. The bridge connects two sections of central Yharnam and serves as the Cleric Beasts Arena. If you look at the stone railing of the bridge before the fight triggers, specifically the section on the left side as you enter from the lantern side, there are scratch marks on top of the railing at regular intervals. They are deep and evenly spaced, the kind of marks you would make if you dragged something heavy along the top of a railing. These marks lead toward the location where the cleric beast stands at the start of the fight, suggesting the beast was dragged there, or guided there, and stood at that spot habitually for long enough to wear marks into the stone. The 14th Easter egg is about the aqueduct shortcut. After you unlock the shortcut gates in central Yharnam that connects back to the starting area, if you walk back through the now open route and look down from the bridge section, there is a ledge visible below that has items on it. These items cannot be reached by any normal path in the game, but they are clearly visible. One of them appears to be a note. The note is not accessible. It will never be picked up. This is one reading of the game that suggests the world contains information the player is simply not meant to have, placed there as a reminder that Yharnam has secrets that no hunter will ever uncover. Number 15 is the placement of the two speaking NPCs in central Yharnam. There are two citizens standing at a window, speaking to you from inside a house, and this is one of the early NPC interactions in the game. Their window is on an upper floor, and they refuse to let you in. But if you look at the building from the outside after speaking with them, the window they spoke from is not on the upper floor, it is on the second floor. From the inside of the conversation, it sounded like they were above you. From the outside, they are level with you. This inconsistency in perspective might suggest the building's interior does not match its exterior geometry, which points towards something about the nature of space in Yharnam that the game never directly explains. Easter egg 16 is in the fire. The large bonfire burning near the central plaza of central Yharnam, where a group of enemies stand in a circle, contains within it something that is easy to miss because of how bright the fire is. If you position the camera at a low angle and look through the base of the fire, there are bones visible in the centre, not enemy bones, not random debris. These are arranged bones, stacked deliberately in a pyre formation. Someone built this fire intentionally. It is a funeral pyre, not a mob fire. The enemies standing around it were not the ones who built it. They are observing it, which changes the entire character of this encounter. Number 17 is about the brick trolls, the large enemies with giant hammers that appear in central Yharnam. These enemies have a specific animation that plays if you stand perfectly still and let them approach you without attacking. Rather than immediately swinging their weapon, they stop a short distance from you and appear to look at you. The animation lasts only a second or two before they attack, but within that moment they tilt their enormous heads slightly to one side, the way a dog or a curious person might. One possible reading is that these creatures retain some fragment of recognition, some memory of seeing a person standing in front of them, and that memory briefly surfaces before the beast takes over completely. The 18th Easter egg in central Yharnam is in the skyline. If you find a position with an open view upward, and you look at the sky above central Yharnam during the standard phase of the game, before any story triggers, the moon is visible, but in a specific position relative to the Grand Cathedral roofline. Every time you return to central Yharnam, regardless of how much time has passed in your playthrough, the moon is in exactly the same position. It has not moved. This is not typical for a game world with a moving sky. The moon in Bloodborne is frozen, and the reason it is frozen is one of the central mysteries of the entire game. The clue is right there in the first area, just sitting in the sky above you. Now, in each of the first 18 Easter eggs, we have covered the details embedded in central Yharnam's layout, its enemies, its architecture, its sounds, and its sky. But there are still 32 paragraphs remaining in this chapter, and they're going to go deeper into the secondary details of this location, the small layered pieces that work together to build a picture. Because in Bloodborne, no single Easter egg tells you the whole story. It is the accumulation that matters. Central Yharnam rewards you for looking at the same place from different angles, and the next batch of details is going to demonstrate exactly that. The details of central Yharnam continue with the lamplight. The lampposts in this area are lit, even though no one appears to be maintaining them. The oil in street lamps requires regular refilling. These lamps are burning at a normal, steady rate, which means they were filled recently. Recently enough that whoever filled them expected the streets to still be in use when the oil ran out. But the streets are clearly abandoned to chaos. The lamplighter came through this street perhaps hours before everything collapsed, going about their routine, having no idea what was about to happen. The graffiti in central Yharnam deserves its own separate reading. There are several pieces of writing on the walls throughout the area that are not blood messages and not item descriptions. They are painted directly onto the stone, and they are written in a script that does not match the Latin adjacent alphabet used in most of the game's text. These pieces of writing are not translated or explained anywhere in the game. They appear in specific locations, always at eye level, always on walls that face major intersections. Someone wrote on these walls to be read by people passing through, and whatever they wrote, the game has chosen not to tell you what it says. The water flow in the central Yharnam sewers has a directionality that is consistent. It flows from east to west, which means the water source is uphill to the east. If you trace the direction of the water flow back through the sewer system, following it upstream rather than downstream, it leads toward the area beneath the Grand Cathedral. The water that flows through the sewers of central Yharnam originates, by implication, from the church compound on the hill above. What the church is draining into the city's water supply is not something the game specifies directly, but the positioning of the flow suggests the church's drainage system and the city's sewer system are connected. The enemy patrol patterns in central Yharnam have a secondary detail that is not about the pattern itself, but about the timing. Each patrol group moves in a rhythm that, if you listen to it rather than watch it, produces a regular cadence. The footsteps of each group fall into the same beat when they are at their closest points to each other. Multiple groups moving independently, with no apparent coordination, end up in rhythmic sync. This kind of environmental audio design is deliberate. The citizens, in their beast-influenced state, are moving in unison without knowing it, drawn into a shared rhythm by whatever force is driving the transformation. There is a door in central Yharnam that you pass during the first few minutes of the game that has a specific detail on its frame. The door is barricaded, like most doors in the area, but this one has a symbol carved into the stone of the door frame. The symbol is small and positioned at about knee height, which means it was carved by someone crouching. It matches loosely the symbol used on healing church documents, but with one element reversed. A reverse church symbol is interpretable as a statement of opposition or as a corruption. Someone stood at this door, crouched down, and carved a warning or a repudiation into the stone at a height where it would only be noticed by someone looking carefully at the ground. The roof access points in central Yharnam are worth examining as a group. There are 3 ladders that lead to rooftops in this area, and each ladder is in a different state of repair. The first is solid and functional. The second is slightly loose, but climbable. The third has rungs missing at the top, and the player character makes a distinct effort animation to bridge the gap. These 3 ladders, in descending order of repair, tell you the order in which people stopped using them. The third ladder, the worst one, leads to the rooftop that has the best view of the Grand Cathedral. People stopped going up there first. Whatever they saw from that rooftop made them stop wanting to look. The candles in central Yharnam are arranged in 2 distinct styles. Some candles are in clusters, melted into irregular organic shapes from long burning. Others are upright, clean, recently placed. The recently placed candles appear near bodies that have not yet begun to decay, which suggests a timeline. Someone is still placing candles near the newly dead. Someone in central Yharnam, as of the night of the hunt, is still performing funeral rites. That person is moving through the area, lighting candles next to the fallen, and has not yet been killed or transformed. Or they have been transformed, and their last coherent act, repeated out of muscle memory, is to light a candle next to a body. The placement of blood echoes. In central Yharnam follows a pattern that most players never think about once they understand the game's mechanics. Blood echoes are dropped by enemies in the form of item glints on the ground when an enemy is killed and the player dies before collecting them. But in central Yharnam, there are a small number of fixed environmental blood echo deposits that appear to have no source. These deposits sit in corners and against walls, as if someone who died there left behind their echoes in an uninterrupted state. These fixed deposits suggest people died at those exact spots, and whatever killed them did so quickly enough that the echoes could not scatter. The bell tower in central Yharnam is visible from several points in the area, and it has a detail in its design that points toward the broader architecture of Yharnam as a city. The bell tower's style does not match the surrounding buildings. The surrounding buildings in central Yharnam use a consistent Victorian Gothic style. The bell tower uses an older design, pre-Gothic, with rounded arches and thicker stonework. The bell tower predates the rest of central Yharnam. It was here before the city was built around it. Whatever the bell tower was used for before the city was built suggests Yharnam did not begin as a single unified settlement. Something was here first and the city grew up around it. The fog that settles in the lower sections of central Yharnam, especially near the sewers and the riverside areas, behaves in a way that is worth noting. Fog in Bloodborne typically moves slowly and uniformly. In central Yharnam, the ground-level fog in the lower areas drifts in a specific direction that is inconsistent with any observable wind effect. The fog moves toward the sewer entrance. It drifts downward into the sewer system. This is a detail that suggests either a suction effect coming from below, pulling the fog in, or the fog itself is not ordinary atmospheric moisture. Something beneath the city is drawing the low-lying air and vapour down into it. There are windows throughout central Yharnam that are lit from within, and the pacing of the flickering within those lit windows is not uniform. Some windows have steady light. Some have light that flickers irregularly. One window, accessible to line of sight from the top of a building near the shortcut gate, flickers in a pattern. The pattern has a rhythmic quality to it. A long pause, then 2 short flickers, then a long pause again. This is not the natural flicker of a candle or fire. It is too consistent. One possible reading is that someone inside that building is using the window light to signal, either to another person they can see from inside, or simply out of hope that someone would notice. The item placement at the top of the central staircase in central Yharnam is specific. At the top of the wide stone staircase that connects the lower and upper sections of the main area, there are 2 items on opposite sides of the top step. They are positioned symmetrically, equidistant from the centre of the staircase. They are not valuable items, Both are common consumables, but their symmetrical placement implies they were set there deliberately. Not dropped in a panic or placed by randomness. Someone arranged items on both sides of the top of the stairs as if marking a threshold. Crossing the top of the stairs, in their understanding, meant entering a different zone, and the items were an offering or a marker at the boundary. The chain that hangs from the building facade near the middle section of central Yharnam is attached at the top to a hook embedded in the mortar. It is long enough that it reaches almost to the ground, but not quite. It hangs free and swings slowly in the ambient breeze. If you watch it swing, the arc of the swing is not quite consistent with the wind you can observe affecting other hanging objects nearby. The chain swings as if something was recently on it, and the momentum of that weight has not fully dissipated. Something hung from that chain, or climbed it, or swung on it very recently, before you arrived in this section of the city. The stone gargoyles on the building tops in central Yharnam are a design detail that most players notice but do not examine closely. If you get to a position where you can see multiple gargoyles at once and compare their postures, you will find that they are not all facing the same direction. Gargoyles in Gothic architecture traditionally face outward, protecting the building from evil spirits approaching from outside. In central Yharnam, several of the gargoyles have been turned. They face inward, toward the city, toward the streets. This either happened naturally due to the building shifting and settling over time, or the direction was intentional from the beginning, which means the buildings were designed to watch the city, not protect it from what was outside. A detail in the blood staining on the cobblestones of central Yharnam tells a story that the game never narrates. Bloodstains follow the direction of movement when they originate from something that was moving. In multiple locations in central Yharnam, you can find blood smears on the ground that trail from a point somewhere in the middle of an open space toward a wall. The blood leads to walls, not to doorways, not to alleys. Whatever was bleeding was moving toward walls. This could mean it was fleeing, pressing itself against a wall, or being dragged to a wall. In one location, the blood smear ends at a wall that has visible scorch marks above the blood trail, suggesting something violent happened there, and the fire that caused the scorch marks and the bleeding that caused the trail were part of the same event. The position of the Cleric Beast boss gate, the large fog gate that blocks progress until you choose to enter the boss fight, is not at a natural architectural boundary. There is no doorway or arch at the gate's position. The fog gate appears in the middle of the Great Bridge, roughly 2/3 of the way across. This is an unusual position for a boss gate in the Soulsborne framework, where gates typically align with architectural transitions. The gate's position in the middle of the bridge suggests the bridge itself was the threshold, and the beast occupying that bridge has made the bridge its territory up to a very specific point. The beast does not leave the final third of the bridge. The gate marks where the beast stops, not where any architectural boundary lies. The shadows in central Yharnam are designed with a specific quality that contributes to the atmosphere without being explicitly highlighted. In most areas of the game, shadows are cast consistently based on the light sources present. In central Yharnam, there are several locations where the shadows do not match the light sources. A barrel fire casts a shadow that points in the wrong direction relative to the flame. A window's light creates a shadow on the ground below it that implies the light source is at an angle inconsistent with the window's position. These shadow inconsistencies are either technical imperfections or deliberate design choices. In a game where so much is deliberate, the second option feels more likely. The light in central Yharnam is not entirely trustworthy. The texture of the cobblestones in central Yharnam changes in one specific location. Throughout the area, the cobblestones are roughly consistent in size and weathering, but in a section just before the shortcut to the sewer entrance, the cobblestones are noticeably larger and more regular. They are a different kind of stone altogether, smoother and lighter in colour. This section of road was repaved at some point using different materials than the rest of the city, and it was repaved well, not hastily. The repaving covers an area of about 10 metres by 6 metres, which is a specific bounded area. Whatever was underneath that section of road was sealed thoroughly enough to warrant professional resurfacing. The iron fencing throughout central Yharnam has a design motif repeated across multiple fence sections. Interspersed between the standard Gothic fence spires, there are stylized representations of what appear to be eyes. The eyes are not immediately obvious because they're incorporated into the ironwork as decorative elements, but if you look at the negative space within the fence design at certain points, the eye shape is unmistakable. An eye motif in Bloodborne is never purely decorative. Eyes in this game carry the weight of the entire cosmic horror framework. The fences of central Yharnam were designed or chosen by someone who wanted to embed a reference to something that sees, something that watches, into the boundary structures of the city. The acoustic design of central Yharnam creates a specific auditory experience that changes depending on where you're standing in the area. In the open plaza areas, the ambient sound is predominantly the distant screaming and fire. In the narrow alleys, the sound shifts and becomes more compressed, with echoes that cause sounds to seem like they're coming from multiple directions simultaneously. The most unusual acoustic location is inside the sewer tunnel. In the sewer, there is a point roughly halfway along the main channel where the ambient sound almost entirely drops away. The screaming and fire are inaudible. The only sounds are the water and your footsteps. This is not typical sewer acoustics. This is a dead zone where the sounds of the city above cannot penetrate. Standing in that silent spot in the middle of a collapsing city has a quality that the game does not call attention to, but that every player feels, even without understanding why. The lamp at the beginning of central Yharnam is the point from which all navigation in the area begins. Most players use it purely as a respawn and travel point, but the lamp itself has a detail in its design. The glass panels of the lamp are etched with a pattern. The pattern is small enough that you need to be very close to the lamp to see it. The etching on the glass depicts something that resembles a branching tree or a river system with many tributaries flowing from a single source. This etching is on the lamp at the very start of the game, at the point from which all journeys in the area originate. A branching pattern on a source point at the origin of all travel. The possible reading here connects to the idea of the Great Ones, the cosmic entities of Bloodborne's lore, whose influence spreads like branches from a central point into the minds and bodies of the people around them. The height of the buildings in central Yharnam is not uniform, and the variation in building height follows a gradient. The buildings closest to the street level that leads toward the Grand Cathedral are taller. The buildings farther away from that route are shorter. Yharnam was built to frame a path. The city's architecture was designed around the approach to the church, and the buildings were constructed at heights intended to make the church visible, to make the path upward to the church feel like a procession. Even in ruins, even filled with monsters, the layout of central Yharnam is performing a religious function. Every time you walk through this area, on your way to the Grand Cathedral, you are following the path the city was built to encourage. The bodies in central Yharnam that are positioned on the ground, in non-combat poses, slumped against walls, or curled in doorways, are dressed differently from the citizens who have transformed and now attack you. The transformed enemies wear layered clothing, coats, shawls, hats, practical gear for people who are moving around. The bodies on the ground wear formal attire, dress coats, collared shirts, structured garments that are not designed for movement. These people were not out on the street when the hunt began. They were indoors, dressed for an evening at home, and something drew them outside or killed them where they sat in their parlours and dragged them to these doorways. There is a specific window in central Yharnam that overlooks the main boulevard, positioned on the third floor of a building that cannot be entered. The window is open, and curtains move through it in the wind. This is unremarkable. But if you watch the curtains for an extended period, you will see that they do not always move in response to the same wind that moves other fabric objects in the area. The curtains in that window move at irregular intervals, sometimes when nothing else in the environment is moving, independently, as if something inside the room behind that window is displacing air in the room, creating a pressure change that pushes the curtains and then stops. The final Easter egg in central Yharnam that we will examine before moving on is in the relationship between the area's geometry and its visual horizon. Standing at the highest accessible point in central Yharnam, which is a rooftop near the third ladder access point, and looking toward the Grand Cathedral in the distance, you are at exactly the right height to see the Grand Cathedral's entrance on the same horizontal plane as your eye level. From the highest point in central Yharnam, your gaze is level with the front door of the church. This is not accidental perspective. The rooftop you're standing on was the last place a citizen of Yharnam could stand and look the Grand Cathedral in the eye. Below that height, you must look up at the church. On that rooftop, for a moment, you are its equal. Chapter 2: Cathedral Ward and the Healing Church Workshop. Cathedral Ward is the area that connects central Yharnam to the upper reaches of the city, and it carries within it the heaviest concentration of Healing Church symbolism in the game. This is where the church's presence becomes physically real rather than merely atmospheric. Easter egg 19 begins at the entrance to Cathedral Ward itself, where the transition from central Yharnam's cobblestone streets to the ward's wider, more formal pathways is marked by a change in the stones underfoot. The stones in Cathedral Ward are cut more precisely and maintained more carefully than those below. Even now, in the devastation of the hunt, the upper city's roads are in better condition than those of the lower city. Yharnam maintained a strict hierarchy in its infrastructure, and that hierarchy is visible in the quality of the stone you walk on. The 20th Easter egg is in the positioning of the Healing Church messengers. Throughout Cathedral Ward there are small statues of the messengers, the creatures that serve as the player's interface with items and upgrades. These statues appear in niches and alcoves throughout the ward. If you map their locations, they form a rough ring around the building that houses the Cathedral Ward lamp. The ring is not perfect, and the spacing is not uniform, but the general distribution suggests the messengers were placed to encircle a specific point. The building containing the lamp, whatever its original purpose, was important enough to have messengers positioned around it on all sides. Easter egg 21 is the window glass in Cathedral Ward. The windows in this area are leaded glass with designs in them, and the designs are not merely decorative. They depict scenes, and the scenes are arranged in a sequence around the ward's perimeter buildings. If you read the windows in order, moving clockwise around the ward from the entrance, the scenes depict what appears to be a narrative about a ceremony involving multiple participants and a central figure. The final window in the sequence, on the building closest to the gate leading upward toward the Grand Cathedral, shows the central figure alone. Whatever ceremony the windows depict ended with everyone but one person gone. The 22nd Easter egg is the width of the Cathedral Ward's main street. The street is wide enough for a large procession, far wider than necessary for ordinary foot traffic. The width of the street, combined with the smooth paving and the formal lampposts at regular intervals, confirms that this street was designed for ceremonial use. The Healing Church conducted processions through this street. People stood on the sides and watched. The street was built for spectacle and for the movement of important things from one place to another. Now it is empty, and the width of it makes it feel especially abandoned. Number 23 is a detail on the Cathedral Ward lamppost bases. The lampposts in this area, unlike those in central Yharnam, have text engraved on their bases. The text is small and runs along the base in a continuous line. It is not immediately readable because the angle of viewing makes it difficult to see clearly, but it appears to be a repeating phrase, rather than unique text. The same phrase is engraved on each base, which suggests a formal statement rather than an individual inscription. The phrase functions as a declaration of the church's authority over this space, not a decorative element, but a legal or ecclesiastical claim. Easter egg 24 involves the gargoyles of Cathedral Ward, which are different from those in central Yharnam. In the ward, the gargoyles are much more humanoid in their design. Their faces are not abstract animal faces, but recognizable human faces caught in expressions of anguish or pleading. These were not designed from imagination. The gargoyles of Cathedral Ward look like portraits of specific people. Whoever designed or commissioned these gargoyles had specific individuals in mind, and those individuals are depicted in permanent stone poses of suffering on the church's perimeter. Whether they were sinners memorialized in shame or something else entirely, the realism of the faces suggests they were based on real subjects. The 25th Easter egg is in the placement of the amputee enemies in Cathedral Ward. The crippled enemies who drag themselves along the ground in this area are concentrated in a specific section near the entrance to the Healing Church Workshop side area. They are not evenly distributed throughout Cathedral Ward. They are clustered near one entrance. If the Healing Church Workshop was a place where experimental procedures were conducted, the presence of these enemies, specifically near its entrance, suggests the procedures that happened inside produced the victims, now crawling around outside. The workshop's experiments followed their subjects out into the ward. Number 26 is about the Healing Church Workshop's doors. The workshop is entered through a locked door that you open from the other side after ascending through a different route. But the workshop has a second door, visible from the outside of the building, that is not locked. It is simply wedged shut with a piece of timber propped against it. This door could be opened from the outside. Someone closed this door from the inside and wedged it shut from inside by pushing the timber into place. Then they left through a different exit. They did not want to be followed into the workshop, and they left that door blocked from inside after they came in from outside, which means they were inside the workshop when they decided they did not want to be found. Easter egg 27 is the height discrepancy in the Healing Church Workshop. When you navigate through the workshop, there are floors and platforms connected by ladders and drops. But if you try to reconcile the height of these internal floors with the external profile of the building, something does not add up. The internal space of the workshop is taller than the external building suggests it should be. The workshop contains more vertical space inside than is architecturally possible based on the building's visible exterior. This is a subtle geometry inconsistency, and it suggests either the building was built with a hidden floor below ground level, or the internal proportions of the building do not reflect objective space. The 28th Easter egg is in the items hidden in the workshop's upper area. Near the top of the Healing Church Workshop, in a section that requires some exploration to reach, there are several item pickups that are not typical combat drops. They are placed deliberately, arranged on a surface rather than left on the ground. One of these items is a note that refers to a measurement, a specific numerical value. This measurement corresponds, if you look at the game's internal lore text for certain equipment, to a calibration reading associated with early Pthumerian research instruments. Someone in the Healing Church Workshop was using Pthumerian measurement systems in their research, which suggests the church's research was far more deeply rooted in Pthumerian knowledge than the game's surface narrative acknowledges. Number 29 is the view from the top of the Cathedral Ward Tower. The tower, accessible in the Cathedral Ward area, gives you a view of the surrounding city that is available nowhere else in the normal game world. From the top of that tower, you can see the layout of central Yharnam below in a way that reveals its street grid. The grid of central Yharnam seen from above is not random urban growth. The main streets of central Yharnam form a radial pattern centered on the point directly below the Grand Cathedral's front door. The entire lower city was built to radiate outward from a point beneath the church, like a symbol seen from above, a symbol with the church at its centre. Easter egg 30 involves the corpse in Cathedral Ward that holds a specific set of items near the entrance to the area. This corpse is dressed in healing church attire, the white robes of a church doctor. The corpse is not in a position of having been killed. It is seated in a doorway, in a posture that resembles rest or meditation. The church doctor died sitting, not running, not fighting. Whatever happened to this person, they had time to find a doorway, sit down, and wait for the end to come. The items on the body are research notes, which a healing church doctor would carry as a matter of course. But the notes, when read, describe something being observed from within the building behind the doorway where the doctor is sitting. They were observing something inside from the outside. The 31st Easter egg is in the staircase leading upward toward the Grand Cathedral from Cathedral Ward. The staircase is long and wide, built for procession, and it curves gently as it rises. Along the inside curve of the staircase, there is a continuous carved relief running the full length of the railing. The relief is worn with age and not easily legible in most lighting conditions. But in the specific light quality that exists in Cathedral Ward, around the area nearest to the Grand Cathedral, the relief becomes legible. It depicts a long line of figures walking in the same direction the staircase travels, walking upward. They are carrying something. It is not clear what they're carrying, but every figure in the relief is carrying the same object. Number 32 is a sound detail specific to the Cathedral Ward area near the Uden Chapel. The chapel interior has a sound design that is unique to the area. Unlike most indoor spaces in the game, the Uden Chapel produces an echo quality in the audio that implies a much larger space than the visible room. The reverberation in the chapel suggests the room acoustically behaves as if it were 3 or 4 times larger than what you can see. This is either an audio design choice for atmospheric effect, or it points toward the idea that Uden, the formless Great One associated with this space, occupies the room in a dimension that the player cannot see, and the audio is reflecting off surfaces that have no physical presence. Easter egg 33 is in the Uden Chapel itself. The chapel is the area where the safe NPCs gather during the game, and each NPC who comes to the chapel has a specific place they stand or sit. If you record where each NPC positions themselves in the chapel space, they occupy positions that, when mapped, mirror a specific arrangement. The arrangement matches the seating arrangement described in certain item descriptions related to Uden cult rituals. The NPCs in the chapel are, without knowing it or being directed to, positioning themselves in the arrangement used for Uden worship. The survivors of Yharnam taking shelter in the chapel are unconsciously recreating the ritual formation of those who worshipped the thing that lives in it. Number 34 is about the altar in Uden Chapel. The altar at the back of the chapel is bare. It has no offerings, no candles lit upon it, no religious items of any kind on its surface. It is smooth stone with nothing on it. But if you look at the surface of the altar carefully, there are indentations in the stone where objects were once placed and then removed, rings where something cylindrical stood, for long enough to leave a mark in the stone. Whatever was on this altar was taken away, and it was taken recently because the marks are fresh. Something was removed from the altar of the chapel where the survivors of Yharnam are sheltering, shortly before you arrived. The 35th Easter egg is in the gate between Cathedral Ward and the Grand Cathedral. The gate is enormous and ornate, designed to impress and to create a sense of threshold. The gate's decorative elements include, at eye level on each post, a small face. The face is not the face of a saint or a stylized religious figure. It is a naturalistic face, specific in its features with deep-set eyes and a high brow. It is the same face on both posts, the same person's face on both gate posts at the entrance to the Grand Cathedral, positioned to watch everyone who passes through. This person was important enough to be memorialized at the most significant threshold in the Healing Church's architecture, but their name is never mentioned in any item, note, or dialogue in the game. Easter egg 36, the final one in this chapter, is about the cathedral ward at night versus the cathedral ward in comparison to other time-of-day states. Bloodborne does not have a day and night cycle for the player to observe. The game is always night, but certain objects in Cathedral Ward cast shadows that would only be consistent with a light source directly overhead, like high noon sunlight, rather than the moon and ambient fire that are actually present. Specific architectural elements, specifically the buttresses on the eastern face of the Grand Cathedral building, cast short, symmetric shadows downward rather than the long-angled shadows that the game's lighting conditions would produce. These buttresses were modelled, or their shadow bake was calculated, in a different lighting condition than the one that exists in the game world. They remember the sun. The sun that has not shone on Yharnam in the game's present is preserved in the geometry of the shadows of the Grand Cathedral. Chapter 3. Old Yharnam. Old Yharnam is the part of the city that was already destroyed before the events of the game begin. It is the version of Yharnam that lost a previous hunt catastrophically and was sealed off afterward. Coming to Old Yharnam as a player means stepping into a place that has already experienced what the rest of the city is currently going through, and everything here has had years to settle, petrify, and become permanent. Easter egg 37 is at the very entrance to Old Yharnam, where a sign is posted warning hunters to stay out. The sign is written in the game's in-world script, and the message is a formal prohibition. But the sign is not posted by the Healing Church. The signature on the sign belongs to a figure described in item lore as a hunter of hunters, a member of the League, an organisation that predates the formal church hunting establishment. Old Yharnam was sealed by independent hunters, not by the church itself, and that distinction matters. Number 38 is the condition of the buildings in Old Yharnam relative to those in Central Yharnam. The buildings in Central Yharnam are damaged, barricaded, and in chaos, but they are structurally sound. The buildings in Old Yharnam have reached a state of decay that takes decades, not years. Roofs have collapsed inward. Upper stories have fallen. Stone has been blackened by fire, not just on the surface, but all the way through, indicating a fire hot enough and long enough to fundamentally change the composition of the stone. The fire that ended Old Yharnam was not a mob fire or a bonfire. It was a conflagration of a scale that suggests the use of incendiary weapons of some kind, weapons designed to produce a fire that would be very difficult to extinguish. The 39th Easter egg is about the Gatling gun hunter, the enemy that fires down at you from a tower in Old Yharnam. The positioning of this enemy is tactical, placed to cover the widest possible field of approach. But the hunter's ammunition supply is something that is easy to overlook. The hunter has been firing that gun for what appears to be a very long time, given the number of shell casings visible around the tower position. The casings are not a recent accumulation. There are far too many for a single night. This hunter has been at their post in Old Yharnam for longer than the current hunt has been going on. They have been there, watching, firing at anyone who approaches, for years, since the sealing. Easter egg 40 is in the texture of the cobblestones in Old Yharnam's primary street. Unlike the cobblestones of Central Yharnam, which retain their original colour and shape, the cobblestones of Old Yharnam are uniformly darkened by fire. But within that uniform darkness there are areas where the stones are a different shade of dark, almost purple-black rather than grey-black. These differently coloured stones are concentrated in the areas closest to where the burning beasts of Old Yharnam appear. The burning beasts are fire elementals, monsters that carry fire within their bodies and radiate heat. The purple-black discoloration of the stones near them is not from the original fire that burned Old Yharnam. It is from heat that has continued to emanate from these creatures, since they appeared years ago, baking the stones a specific shade darker over a long period of low-intensity heat. Number 41 is about the church building in Old Yharnam. There is a church in Old Yharnam, distinct from the healing church apparatus above, that appears to have been a pre-existing religious structure that the church built around or incorporated. The architecture of this building uses a different style than the healing church Gothic, visible in Cathedral Ward. It is older, with a more Romanesque character, and the decorative elements on its exterior include imagery that has nothing to do with the moon, blood, or the Great Ones. This building was worshipping something else long before the healing church arrived. What happened to the congregation of this older church when the healing church took over is not stated anywhere in the game. The 42nd Easter egg is in the river that runs through the lower section of Old Yharnam. The river is visible and audible, but not directly accessible to the player in the normal exploration path. It runs below the primary bridge that spans the lower area, and its water is strikingly clear, given everything that has happened in Old Yharnam. Clear water in a burned, ruined environment is unusual. Water in burned environments typically becomes contaminated quickly from ash and dissolved minerals. This water is clear, which suggests either it is moving fast enough to flush contaminants, or its source is not being affected by what has happened to Old Yharnam. The river is fed from somewhere that is clean and untouched, somewhere beneath Old Yharnam or upstream of it. Easter egg 43 is about the beast-patient enemies in Old Yharnam. These enemies are in a further stage of transformation than the citizens of central Yharnam. Their bodies have undergone more extensive physical change, but some of them retain items from their previous lives. One specific enemy in a hallway in Old Yharnam's building interior has a small object visible in its transformed hands. It is holding a book. The book is crushed and partially absorbed into the creature's transformed flesh, but it is clearly legible as a book. This beast was reading when the transformation took it. It was doing something quiet and domestic, and then the transformation came, and it held on to what it was holding because whatever remained of who it was did not let go. Number 44 is in the tower accessed during the Old Yharnam section, where you encounter the Gatling gun hunter. From the top of that tower, looking outward over the rooftops of Old Yharnam, you can see that some of the collapsed buildings have newer wood in their debris. The fresh wood, lighter in colour than the fire-blackened timber everywhere else, suggests that someone made repairs to some of these structures after the initial burning. Someone tried to make Old Yharnam habitable again, started repairs on specific buildings, and then stopped. The partial repairs, begun and abandoned, suggest someone with resources and intention entered Old Yharnam after it was sealed, started to restore it, and something stopped them. The 45th Easter egg is in the Beast Lawrence's chalice. Lawrence is the first vicar of the healing church, and the beast version of Lawrence is encountered in the DLC. But within Old Yharnam, there is a reference to Lawrence that exists even in the base game. A skull visible on a desk in a buildable interior in Old Yharnam is positioned in a way that suggests it has been used as a paperweight, placed on top of a stack of papers. The skull has no name attached to it, but the papers beneath it, if you can position the camera to read them, contain the word Lawrence in the game's writing system. Lawrence's skull, or a skull someone labelled with his name, is sitting in Old Yharnam in a building that has been abandoned for decades. Easter egg 46 is about the burning beasts as a group, and what their distribution in Old Yharnam tells us. The burning beasts appear at 3 locations in Old Yharnam, and if you draw a line between those 3 locations on a mental map of the area, they form a triangle. The centre of that triangle is directly over the altar of the old church building. This is not a defensive distribution, as enemies are typically placed. It looks more like a perimeter or a boundary. The burning beasts are surrounding the church from 3 equidistant points. One possible reading is that these creatures, in whatever fragmented consciousness remains in them, are maintaining a vigil around the old church, drawn there by something that has not stopped calling to them from within the building. Number 47 is a sound detail specific to the interior of the main building in Old Yharnam, the multi-story structure that you climb through to access the Gatling gun hunter. On one of the mid-level floors, in a hallway that contains no enemies at that point, there is a sound audible for a duration of 2 to 3 seconds if you stop moving completely. The sound is very low and occurs once every 40 to 60 seconds of real time. It is a single low tone without overtones or harmonics, a pure, clean tone that does not belong to any instrument or mechanical source visible in the environment. It is the sound of something resonating. Something in Old Yharnam is still vibrating at a frequency that produces a pure tone, periodically, in that specific hallway. Easter egg 48 is in the design of the bridge spanning the lower area of Old Yharnam. The bridge has a unique decorative element on its railings. At regular intervals, the railing posts have small carved figures on their tops. These figures are not gargoyles or saints. They are figures of humans, standing upright, with their arms at their sides, normal people, carved in miniature and placed on top of bridge posts, standing, watching. 140 of these small figures line the bridge railings. Whoever commissioned this bridge wanted the bridge lined with watchers, small stone people observing everything that passed over or under the bridge. The bridge of Old Yharnam was always meant to be watched. The 49th Easter egg is in the smell. This is a game, and games do not have smells. But the visual design of Old Yharnam communicates a smell through texture and detail with such precision that the area effectively conveys its olfactory character. The visual cues in Old Yharnam, the combination of char, old wood, standing water, and the specific amber colouring of certain surfaces, communicate a smell that anyone who has experienced a very old fire site would recognise. The designers went to specific lengths in the visual design of Old Yharnam to make the area feel sensory in the way that ruins feel sensory. They made it feel like a place you can smell. The 50th Easter egg in this chapter, and the one that perhaps defines Old Yharnam most precisely, is in the relationship between Old Yharnam and the rest of Yharnam as visible from within Old Yharnam itself. From certain vantage points in Old Yharnam's upper section, you can see the rest of the city, central Yharnam, Cathedral Ward, the light of the Grand Cathedral on the hill. Old Yharnam is physically lower than everything else. The burned district sank or was built in a depression, or the rest of the city grew upward while it was destroyed. Every living part of Yharnam looks down on Old Yharnam. The city that failed is at the bottom, and the city that is currently failing is above it, looking down at what it is about to become. Chapter 4. Hemwick Charnel Lane. Hemwick Charnel Lane is an area that functions in the game as a side route, a detour from the main path, and it is easy to rush through without looking carefully. But Hemwick is one of the most carefully detailed areas in the entire game. Its central concept, the Charnel Lane, refers to a pathway alongside a burial ground or an execution site. The name is not incidental. Every design choice in Hemwick is built around the idea of death as an ongoing process rather than a terminus. Easter egg 51 is at the entrance to Hemwick Charnel Lane. The gate leading into the area is partially open, just enough for a person to slip through, but not enough to admit something larger. The gate was opened from within, pulled outward from inside the gate by someone coming out, and left open just enough to allow passage. Someone left Hemwick this way recently, and they did not want anything they were leaving behind to be able to follow them back out. Number 52 is about the witch enemies in Hemwick. The witches, or the Hemwick Charnel Witches, as the boss represents, are the primary transformation variant of this area. Unlike the beast transformations in the rest of Yharnam, the witches' transformation has a different quality. They move with a fluidity that the beast enemies do not have, as if they are not fighting the transformation, but moving within it comfortably. This suggests their exposure to whatever catalyzed their change happened differently from the beast plague in the city. The witches of Hemwick encountered something different than the citizens of Yharnam, and they changed in a way that left them more functional, more controlled, which is a different and arguably more disturbing outcome. Easter egg 53 is in the items found in the first building of Hemwick. The building at the entrance of the lane, which contains several witch enemies, has a second floor accessible by a staircase. On the second floor, there is a table with items arranged on it. The arrangement is deliberate, a line of items from left to right, as if they were placed in a specific order for examination. The items in this line range from a common consumable on the left to a rarer item on the right, and the ordering corresponds to increasing rarity and research value. This is a researcher's workspace. Someone was evaluating and ordering items by their properties, moving from simple to complex, and they were interrupted before they finished. 54 is the layout of the charnel lane itself, the main path through Hemwick. The path winds through overgrown cemetery ground, past grave markers and execution frames, and it has a quality of having been maintained relatively recently. The gravel on the path is not overgrown. The grave markers are upright, not leaning or fallen. Hemwick Charnel Lane was being maintained as a functional burial site until not very long ago. Whoever was responsible for maintaining this area continued their work even as Yharnam descended into chaos. The Charnel Lane was considered important enough to maintain through the early stages of the catastrophe. Easter egg 55 is in the grave markers themselves. Most of the grave markers in Hemwick are standard stone markers with inscriptions that are too weathered to read, but one cluster of markers near the midsection of the lane has a specific quality. The markers in this cluster are cut from a different type of stone than the rest of the markers. The stone is lighter, a fine-grained limestone rather than the rough grey stone of the others. These markers were placed more recently than the surrounding graves. Someone was buried in Hemwick Charnel Lane recently, interred with proper markers cut from fresh stone in the middle of an area that is now consumed by the chaos of the hunt. A formal burial happened here recently, conducted with care and proper materials. Number 56 is about the execution frames visible in Hemwick. These are large wooden structures from which people were hanged, and they appear at several points along the lane. Most of them are empty and weathered, but two of the frames still have ropes attached, and the ropes show fraying at the cut point rather than at the knot. The ropes were cut, not untied. Someone who was hanged from these frames was cut down rather than left there. Who cut them down, and whether the person was alive when they were cut down, is a question the game does not answer, but the detail of the cut rope, rather than an untied or decayed rope, suggests an intentional removal, not just decay over time. Easter egg 57 is a visual detail in the fog. Hemwick Charnel Lane has a specific quality of low-lying fog that is present throughout the area. This fog is denser than what appears in central Yharnam, and within it there are occasional disturbances, shapes or movements that do not correspond to any enemy or environmental element you can identify. These shapes in the fog appear at specific locations along the lane, always at the same spots, always briefly visible before the fog closes around them. One possible reading is that these disturbances in the fog are the result of something present in those specific spots that displaces the fog by existing in the same space, something that has mass and presence but is not visible directly. 58 is the sound of the crows in Hemwick. The crow calls in this area are more frequent and more varied than the crow ambience in other parts of Yharnam. If you stop and listen to them specifically, rather than treating them as background noise, you will notice that they call in response to things happening in the environment. When an enemy moves nearby, the crows respond before the enemy is visible. When something dies, the crows go quiet for a short period afterward. The crows of Hemwick are attentive to what is happening on the ground. They are watching and reacting. In mythology and in real ecology, crows are highly attentive to death and predation in their environment. The game's crows behave consistently with real crow behaviour, which makes them a form of environmental indicator in Hemwick. Easter egg 59 is in the arrangement of tombstones near the boss fog gate for the Witch of Hemwick. The area just before the boss area has a cluster of tombstones positioned in a way that is distinct from the rest of the cemetery. They are arranged in a semicircle around the entrance to the boss area, with the open side of the semicircle facing the fog gate. This arrangement is not a burial pattern. It is a ritual arrangement, a circle open toward a focal point. The tombstones near the boss gate are not graves in the conventional sense. They were placed by whoever used this space for purposes unrelated to burial. The markers were placed to define a ritual space, and the boss fog gate occupies the position where the ritual's focal point would have been. Number 60 is about the eye rune that appears in connection with Hemwick. The Hemwick charnel witches drop the eye rune, which in the game's lore is associated with knowledge, with perception, and with the insight mechanic. The witches who inhabit this burial lane specifically carry a rune associated with seeing. In a location built around death and burial, the dominant spiritual gift is perception. The Hemwick witches see something in the dead that gives them knowledge. One possible reading is that the burial ground itself, the concentration of death in this place, has given the witches access to something that functions like insight, the same quality that seeing a great one grants the hunter. They have learned to read the dead. Easter egg 61 is in the roots that grow through the burial ground. Tree roots in Hemwick Charnel Lane intrude through the ground surface in several places, lifting grave markers and cracking the path. These roots come from specific trees visible at the boundary of the area, large old trees that have been growing for a very long time. The angle and direction of the root intrusions tells you which trees they come from, and by extension, how old those trees are. The roots have been growing through this burial ground for decades, possibly centuries. The trees that line Hemwick Charnel Lane predate the lane itself. They were here before anyone started burying people here. Whoever chose this location for a burial ground chose it in proximity to very old, very large trees, and that choice may have been intentional. Number 62 is a detail in the Witch of Hemwick boss fight itself. The witch is invisible for much of the fight, revealing herself only when she attacks or when you're in possession of the eye of a blood-drunk hunter. The boss arena is a large circular space, and within that space there are specific locations on the floor that produce a visible disturbance, a slight ripple effect, when the witch passes over them. These floor disturbances are consistent across multiple playthroughs. The witch uses the same routes when invisible, and those routes are always the same. Whatever the witch is doing when invisible, whether moving or standing still, she returns to the same positions repeatedly. She is not randomly wandering. She is visiting specific points in the arena in a sequence, a ritual, in which visibility is simply one phase. Easter egg 63 is in the reward for defeating the witch. The key item you receive after the fight, which unlocks further progression, is associated with a passage in the item lore that does not align with the passage you actually use the key to unlock. The lore suggests the item leads to something that predates the Healing Church's involvement in this area. The passage it unlocks leads into the back of a building in Cathedral Ward. This means Hemwick Charnel Lane and Cathedral Ward are connected by a route that predates the church, a pre-existing passage that the church later incorporated into its architecture without acknowledging. The passage already existed. The church built around it. 64 is about the witch enemies before the boss. The witches you fight throughout Hemwick are not all in the same stage of transformation. Some are more human in their appearance and movement, some are further along. They appear to be at different points in the same process, which suggests the transformation in Hemwick is ongoing, not completed. New transformations are happening in Hemwick, even as the hunt proceeds. The burial ground is still producing new witches, as if something in the soil or the air of this place continues to change whoever lives here, continuously, in an ongoing process, with no apparent end point. Easter egg 65 is in the colour palette of Hemwick Charnel Lane compared to the rest of Yharnam. Yharnam is predominantly desaturated, grey stone and brown wood and pale moonlight. Hemwick Charnel Lane introduces a persistent green tint in its lighting and in the colour of the vegetation. This green quality is subtle but pervasive throughout the area. It suggests the presence of something living in a place defined by death, something that grows and spreads in a burial ground, feeding on what is put into the soil. The green of Hemwick is not just plant life, it is a visual indicator of something nutritive happening within the burial ground, something that has been growing in this place for a very long time. Number 66 is the silence in Hemwick. Specific areas within Hemwick Charnel Lane are quieter than the ambient noise level would predict. Given the wind, the crow calls, and the distant sounds of the city, there should be a consistent low level of sound throughout the area. But certain passages, specifically the path segments that run between the oldest grave markers, are significantly quieter. The ambient noise drops. This acoustic characteristic of old cemeteries is real. Dense stone markers and the acoustic properties of disturbed earth can create pockets of reduced sound. In Hemwick, this real acoustic phenomenon is replicated with enough precision that the silence of the grave markers feels genuine rather than designed. The quietest places in Hemwick are the oldest ones. Easter egg 67 is in an item description connected to Hemwick. One of the items associated with the Hemwick area, when its description is read fully, contains a reference to a specific number. The number is presented in the item lore as significant, as a count of something. The number, when cross-referenced with the number of grave markers in Hemwick Charnel Lane that are visible in the game world, is not equal. There are fewer grave markers than the number stated in the lore. This means there are graves in Hemwick that do not have markers, or that some markers have been removed. The lore remembers every burial. The visible world has lost some of them. Number 68 is about the path that leads out the back of Hemwick. After you have explored the full area, there is a path that exits the back of the charnel lane into open ground before the witch's boss area. This back path has no enemies on it and only one item. The item is ordinary, but the path itself is worn. The grass alongside it is pressed flat in the same direction, not randomly distributed as you would expect from an unused path. The flat grass shows traffic, a direction of traffic, from the charnel lane outward toward the open ground. Whatever came down this path, and there was a great deal of it, was moving away from the charnel lane, not toward it. The lane was emptying itself outward. Easter egg 69 is in the light quality specific to the time just before the witch boss area. As you approach the boss fog gate from the charnel lane, there is a specific quality of light that appears at the boundary of the cemetery section and the open ground beyond it. The light is slightly warmer than anywhere else in Hemwick, almost amber-toned, and it comes from a direction inconsistent with the moon's position. This light has no visible source. It exists in a specific zone of the path without any lantern, fire, or luminescent element to account for it. One possible reading is that the light is generated by whatever the witch is doing in the boss area beyond, radiating outward through the fog gate with a warmth that should not belong to a being of her nature. The 70th Easter egg in the Hemwick chapter is about what Hemwick tells us about Yharnam's relationship with death before the healing church's influence. Hemwick Charnel Lane predates the church. The execution frames, the burial practices, the old trees, the pre-existing path connecting to Cathedral Ward, all of this points to a burial culture that was well established in Yharnam before blood ministration and Great One worship arrived. The people of Yharnam had a formal, maintained, respectful relationship with their dead. They built lanes for the dead. They carved proper markers. they maintained the ground. The healing church arrived in a city that already understood death with great care, and then it introduced something that turned death into transformation, into an ongoing process that never fully concluded. The charnel lane is a monument to a time when death in Yharnam was simpler. Easter egg 71 is a structural one. Hemwick Charnel Lane is, geometrically, a dead end in the game's world. You enter it, navigate through it, fight the boss, obtain the key, and use the key in Cathedral Ward. You never exit Hemwick back into open Yharnam. The lane has no exit that leads further into the city. It terminates. This is consistent with the concept of a charnel lane, a path that leads somewhere specific and does not continue beyond its destination. Hemwick was designed as a cul-de-sac of death, a path that ends. Every living thing that entered Hemwick Charnel Lane either died there or left back the way they came. Nothing that went in all the way came out the other side. Number 72 is the final Easter egg in the Hemwick chapter. It is about the silence after the Witch of Hemwick dies. When you defeat the boss in most areas of Bloodborne, the ambient sound changes to reflect the absence of a major threat. In Hemwick, after the witch dies, the crow calls stop. The wind continues, the distant sounds of the city are audible, but the crows go silent. The crows of Hemwick Charnel Lane stop calling when the witch dies, and they do not start again. In every subsequent visit to Hemwick Charnel Lane, after the boss has been defeated, the crow ambience is absent. The crows of Hemwick were specifically responding to the witch. Whatever she was to them, she was significant enough that her death silenced them. The charnel lane without the witch is also a charnel lane without the crows, and the silence of it is different and heavier than the silence before. Chapter 5. Cainhurst Castle. Cainhurst Castle is an optional area in Bloodborne, reached by a secret summons and an elaborate carriage ride, and its optional nature means many players complete the game without ever seeing it. This is exactly what the game wants. Cainhurst is not a secret in the sense that it is hidden from you. It is a secret in the sense that the game gives you every possible reason to ignore it, to miss the invitation, to never find the route. Getting to Cainhurst is itself an Easter egg. Easter egg 73 begins with the carriage approach to the castle. The road leading to Cainhurst, traversed by the ghostly carriage, is visible for its entire length during the cinematic approach. The road has been maintained. In a game where most roads are in states of disrepair or ruin, the road to Cainhurst Castle is smooth, clean, and edged with functioning drainage. Someone has been maintaining the road to Cainhurst. Someone who is alive, with access to road maintenance equipment, has kept this road functional while the rest of Yharnam fell apart. Easter egg 74 is in the first courtyard of Cainhurst. The castle's outer courtyard has a layer of snow on the ground, which is consistent with Cainhurst's elevation and general atmosphere, but the snow in the courtyard has been disturbed. There are tracks in it, clearly visible, that lead from the castle's main entrance toward the outer gate. The tracks go one direction, out, and do not return. Something left the castle after the last snowfall and did not come back in. The size of the tracks, too large to be human footprints, but bipedal and evenly spaced, suggests whatever left was still largely upright and walking normally. Something from inside Cainhurst walked out its front door and went into the snow and did not return. The 75th Easter egg is in the portrait gallery of Cainhurst. The castle interior is lined with portraits of the Cainhurst line, the nobles who inhabited this castle. The portraits are formal, posed, traditional, but if you look at the subject's eyes in each portrait and compare them across multiple paintings, you will notice that a progressive change occurs across the gallery. The earliest portraits, which have the most dust and the oldest frames, show subjects with unremarkable eyes. As the portraits become more recent, the subject's eyes become progressively more unusual. The pupils shift. The irises develop a luminescence that would not photograph or paint naturally. The most recent portraits in the gallery show subjects with eyes that belong to something other than ordinary human anatomy. The Cainhurst line was changing over generations, and whoever painted the portraits was honest enough to record it. Number 76 is in the dining room of Cainhurst. The dining room is set. The table is covered with a tablecloth. Place settings are arranged, and there are glasses set out. The dining room is prepared as if for a dinner that is about to happen. The food on the table is not decomposed in the way food would decompose over years or even months. It is in a state of suspended freshness that suggests the castle's environment is preventing normal decay. Cainhurst Castle is in a pocket of preserved time. The dinner was set for an occasion that never arrived, and the setting has been maintained in that anticipatory state ever since. Easter egg 77 is in the design of the Cainhurst crows. The crows that appear in Cainhurst are visually distinct from the crow ambience birds of Hemwick and Yharnam. They are larger, and their behaviour is different. The Cainhurst crows sit on specific surfaces and do not fly when you approach, they watch. In other areas of the game, birds used in the environment flee from player movement. The Cainhurst crows are stationary observers. They are as much a part of the castle's architecture as the stone gargoyles, placed on specific perches, facing specific directions, maintaining specific vantage points. The crows of Cainhurst are keeping watch over the castle in a deliberate, stationed way. Number 78 is about the Cainhurst Knights, the armoured enemies that populate the castle. These enemies are interesting for what they carry and how they fight. They are skilled, restrained in their movements, and they use weapons and techniques that are consistent with formal martial training. But they are dead. They are clearly undead enemies, yet their movements retain the precision of their training. Whatever killed the Cainhurst Knights did not take their technical skill with it. They fight with the muscle memory of trained soldiers, preserved across death, in the same way the dining room dinner is preserved across time. Cainhurst preserves things that should have decayed. Easter egg 79 is in the libraries of Cainhurst. The castle has bookshelves in multiple rooms, and the books on them are not random. They are organised, spined outward, and if you could read the titles visible on the spines, you would find them grouped by subject. The groupings visible from the game camera include a section on astronomy, a section on natural history, and a section on something that appears to be medical or anatomical based on the imagery on the spines. Cainhurst maintained a library focused on observation and body knowledge. The nobles of Cainhurst were readers and researchers in fields directly adjacent to the healing church's academic interests, and yet the church's relationship with Cainhurst was one of violent destruction. Research peers became enemies. The 80th Easter egg is in the view from the highest tower of Cainhurst. The castle has several towers, and the tallest is accessible through a specific route during the main exploration. From the top of the tallest tower, on a clear enough view of the game's sky, you can see the moon from a perspective that is not available anywhere else in the game. The moon from Cainhurst's tower appears slightly different. Its edges are softer, less defined. The moon that is sharp and precise in Yharnam is blurry from Cainhurst's elevation. One possible reading is that the castle is somehow closer to whatever is affecting the moon, closer to the source of the influence, and the proximity causes the details to blur in the same way that proximity to an extreme light source causes a bloom effect rather than a sharp image. Number 81 is about the stairs in Cainhurst. The main staircase of the castle is in perfect repair. Not good repair or adequate repair, perfect. No cracks, no worn edges, no chips in the stone. The handrail is intact the full length of the stairs on both sides. In a castle that has clearly experienced events of extraordinary violence, the staircase is untouched. Whatever happened at Cainhurst did not involve anyone going up or down the main staircase with enough force or frequency to mark it. The violence of Cainhurst's history happened elsewhere in the building. The main staircase is a pristine corridor through a castle that is otherwise damaged or deteriorated, and that pristine quality makes it feel more unsettling than if it were broken. Easter egg 82 is in the Cainhurst armour set, and what it says about the castle's relationship with blood. The Cainhurst set, when worn, provides specific resistances and penalties listed in its item description. The resistances point toward a body that has been augmented with blood in a different way than the Healing Church's methodology. The Cainhurst approach to blood was aristocratic, the refinement of blood through lineage rather than through ministration, and the armour reflects a body that has been changed by that refinement over generations. The armour was not designed for someone who had undergone one treatment. It was designed for someone whose blood had been changed through inheritance. Number 83 is in the relationship between Cainhurst and the choir, the upper echelon of the Healing Church. The choir eventually destroyed Cainhurst, conducting an annihilation of the castle's inhabitants. But architectural evidence in Cainhurst suggests that at some point before the destruction, the choir and Cainhurst were in contact. There are elements of choir design vocabulary in certain fixtures of Cainhurst, specifically in the window hardware and certain door fittings. These elements were not original to the castle's construction. They were added later at a point when someone from the choir's sphere of influence was working on or in the castle with the castle's apparent cooperation. The choir and Cainhurst were collaborators before they were enemies. Easter egg 84 is in the boss fight arena for Logarius. The roof of Cainhurst Castle, where you fight Alfred's nemesis and the warden of the castle, is not a standard rooftop. It is decorated with a specific arrangement of architectural elements that form a pattern. The crenellations, the statues, the chimney positions, if you view them from above during the fight and map the positions, they form a rough approximation of a symbol associated with Queen Annalise's royal covenant. The roof of Cainhurst Castle was designed in the shape of the Queen's symbol. The Queen's symbolic claim on the castle extends to its highest surface, visible only from the air or from a camera angle, not available to a typical player on the ground. 85 is about the vile Blood Queen herself. Annalise's throne room is accessed through a secret passage, and Annalise herself is present as an NPC. Her dialogue, when you interact with her, contains a specific pause before certain phrases that is unusual in NPC speech patterns. The pause is not consistent across all her dialogue. It occurs specifically before she says anything that refers to time, to the future, or to things that will happen. She pauses before speaking about time, as if the concept requires effort, as if the experience of time for her is qualitatively different from how it works for the hunter. Annalise is not entirely present in the same temporal frame as the player. Easter egg 86 is in the carriage that brings you to Cainhurst. The carriage is a phantom, a vision, and it is not under the control of any visible driver. The carriage moves on its own from the Iosefka's clinic area, following a road. If you watch the wheels of the carriage during the cinematic approach, they turn in the correct direction for forward movement, but they do not spin at the speed consistent with the carriage's velocity. The wheels are turning slower than the carriage is moving, as if the carriage is being carried forward by something other than rolling friction. The wheels are decorative, going through the motion of turning, but they are not doing the actual work of moving the carriage. Whatever moves, the carriage does not operate through mechanical means. Number 87 is in the Cainhurst invitation itself, the item you use to summon the carriage. The item description of the Cainhurst invitation, if read carefully, does not say the invitation was sent to the hunter or addressed to the hunter. It says it was found. The hunter found an invitation that was addressed to someone else. Who the invitation was addressed to is not specified, but the implication is that the original recipient either did not go, or went and did not return, or was the person in Iosefka's clinic who gave it to you. The invitation to Cainhurst was issued to someone who could not use it, and you are using it in their place. Easter egg 88 is in the blood of the vile blood enemies. The enemies at Cainhurst drop a specific type of consumable blood item, and the item has properties different from the blood items dropped by other enemies. The item description suggests the blood has undergone a kind of refinement not achievable through standard blood ministration. It is older, more concentrated, carrying within it the accumulated history of the Cainhurst line. Consuming it does not heal in the standard sense. It transfers something more fundamental. The blood of Cainhurst, even in its enemy form, is categorically different from the blood of the city. It is aristocratic blood, and aristocratic blood, in the framework of Bloodborne's law, operates differently. Number 89 is in the architecture of the throne room. Queen Annalise's throne room is designed with a specific acoustic property. The vaulted ceiling of the room is shaped in a way that creates a focusing effect for sound originating at the throne. Sound produced at the centre of the throne position is amplified and directed toward the room's entrance. This is a design feature of certain real-world throne rooms, allowing the monarch's voice to carry clearly to the room's full extent without shouting. The Cainhurst throne room was built to make the Queen's voice heard, to project it clearly outward. Whatever Annalise says from her throne was intended to reach everyone in the room with perfect clarity. The architecture amplifies her. The 90th Easter egg, which concludes the Cainhurst chapter, is about the single window in Annalise's throne room that faces outward toward Yharnam. The window is positioned directly behind the throne, so that anyone sitting on the throne has Yharnam spread out below them in their peripheral vision. From any seated position on the throne, the city is always visible without looking directly at it, always present at the edge of awareness. Annalise sat on her throne with Yharnam visible in the corner of her eye. Always. The city and its queen were always watching each other from a distance, and the throne room was built to make that mutual, peripheral, never quite direct, watching perpetual. Chapter 6. Forbidden Woods. The Forbidden Woods is the largest overworld area in Bloodborne, and it is the area most players find disorienting on first visit because of how deliberately confusing its layout is. The woods loops back on itself, presents false exits, and contains paths that appear to lead somewhere but terminate without reward. This disorientation is not a design failure. It is a design intention. The Forbidden Woods is supposed to make you lost. Easter egg 91 is at the entrance to the Forbidden Woods, where a gate stands between Cathedral Ward and the forest path. The gate has a mechanism on the Cathedral Ward side, a lever used to open it. The mechanism on the wood side is different. The gate can be opened from the wood side without a lever, using only a specific physical interaction with the gate's frame. The gate was designed to be opened from the wood side from the outside, to allow entry without a key or lever. Something was expected to come out of the Forbidden Woods through this gate, and the gate was built to let it. Easter egg 92 is in the snake enemies of the Forbidden Woods. The snake clusters, multiple snakes grouped into a single entity with one large snake as the head, appear in several locations. Each cluster has a distinct head snake whose colour and patterning is slightly different from the rest of the cluster's component snakes. If you observe these head snakes individually before they attack, you will notice that each head snake has a unique pattern. No two clusters have the same head. These are individuals, distinct snakes, each one the leader of its cluster. The clusters are social groups organised around an individual, and the individual is recognisable by their distinct appearance. These are not random animal enemies. They are organised groups with identifiable leaders. Number 93 is about the village in the Forbidden Woods. There is a human settlement within the Forbidden Forest, accessible through a specific path that many players miss. The village contains living humans, not hunters, not transformed enemies, but ordinary people who are not hostile to you. These people exist in the middle of the forest that is explicitly forbidden. They are living in territory that the healing church has designated off-limits, in an area that contains things the church does not want people to see, and they have been there long enough to build a settlement. Either the church knows about the village and has chosen not to remove it, or the church does not know about it. Both possibilities say something significant about the church's actual control over what happens in the forest. Easter egg 94 is in the way the forest path loops. The main path through the Forbidden Woods has a section where it appears to be a new route, but is, actually, a path you have already been on, approached from a different direction. The first time you notice this, it feels like a level design trick, a recycled path. But if you pay attention to the details of the path at the point where it loops, you will notice that the environmental details have changed slightly. A rock that was on the left side of the path is now on the right. A fallen branch that was blocking a side path is now missing. These small differences suggest either the path genuinely goes somewhere different that happens to look similar, or the forest itself is rearranging its details, presenting familiar paths with subtle variations to sustain the disorientation of being lost in it. 95 is a sound detail from the deeper sections of the Forbidden Woods. In the areas where the canopy is densest and the moonlight barely penetrates, there is a sound that is not in the standard ambient sound palette of the rest of the area. It is low, rhythmic, and has a quality that resembles breathing, very slow breathing at a scale much larger than any creature visible in the environment. The breathing sound is not tied to any specific enemy or object. It occurs throughout the deep canopy sections as a consistent background element. One possible reading is that the Forbidden Woods, as a whole, as a living forest ecosystem, is breathing. Not the trees in the wind, not an animal, but the forest itself, as a single organism producing a respiratory rhythm. Easter egg 96 is in the positioning of the snake cluster enemies relative to the underground laboratory entrance. The hidden path that leads to the underground laboratory in the Forbidden Woods, the research facility connected to Byrgenwerth's experiments, is guarded by a specific concentration of snake clusters. They are gathered around the laboratory entrance in greater numbers than anywhere else in the forest. If the snake clusters are people who have been transformed through Byrgenwerth's experiments with eyes, and if the laboratory is where those experiments were conducted, then the concentration of transformed people around the laboratory entrance suggests something. They have gathered around the place that made them. The transformed are drawn back to the site of their transformation. Number 97 is about the herbs in the Forbidden Woods. The forest contains several species of herb visible in the environment, and some of them match the botanical references in item descriptions for healing consumables. Blood-tinge herbs, the plants used in blood ministration preparations, are visible growing wild in the forest. They are not cultivated. They grow naturally in the Forbidden Woods. The healing church harvested its medicinal ingredients from the Forbidden Woods. The forest that the church forbade entrance to was also the forest from which the church extracted its most important resources. The church needed the woods and excluded everyone else from it simultaneously. Easter egg 98 is in the river that runs through the deeper sections of the Forbidden Woods. The river appears in several locations within the forest, and tracking its flow allows you to trace the watershed of this entire section of Yharnam's geography. The river flows downward from the higher ground near the Byrgenwerth side of the forest toward the lower areas closer to the city. This means the Byrgenwerth compound sits at a higher elevation than Yharnam, at the top of a watershed that eventually feeds the river, which feeds the city's water system. Byrgenwerth's research and whatever it involved flowed physically downhill into Yharnam through the river system. The contamination of Yharnam, whatever its physical component might be, had a plausible hydrological pathway. 99 is about the well in the Forbidden Woods village. The village has a well, which implies the village has been there long enough to dig a well, at minimum several years, and the well is still in use. The rope is not rotted, and the mechanism functions. The well, in a forbidden forest village, is a statement of permanence. These people are not squatters. They have invested in their location. They have committed water infrastructure to this spot. They are not planning to leave. The village in the Forbidden Woods predates the current hunt by at least enough time for a functioning well to become established. They have been there, and they intend to stay there. Easter egg 100 is in the sky, visible from the clearings in the Forbidden Woods. In the open clearings where the canopy breaks, the sky above is visible. The moon, visible from these clearings, is in a different apparent position relative to the horizon than it is from any point in Yharnam proper. This is geometrically impossible within a consistent game world. The moon appears at the same elevation angle in the sky, regardless of where you observe it from, when you are observing it from ground level within a game world of limited geographic scale. The moon's different apparent position in the Forbidden Woods clearings suggests either a different time or a different sky, or both. The sky above the Forbidden Woods is not quite the same sky that is above Yharnam. Number 101 is about the eyes that appear as environmental details in the deeper forest. Eyes, literal eyes, are embedded in certain tree trunks and rock formations in the deep sections of the Forbidden Woods. These are not imagined or metaphorical. They are rendered as distinct ocular structures, with irises and pupils growing within the organic material of the forest. They are open and oriented, positioned as if they have sightlines rather than random placement. These eyes in the forest are looking at specific things. The trees that have eyes embedded in them are pointing toward things of interest. The path to Bjergenwerth, the entrance to the laboratory, the river. The forest has developed a visual attention system. Easter egg 102 is in the dog kennels in the Forbidden Woods village. The village has kennels containing large hunting dogs. These dogs are aggressive, a standard enemy encounter, but the kennels themselves are unusually large, built for dogs bigger than the ones currently inside them. The kennels were built to specific dimensions that exceed the current occupants, which suggests either the original dogs were larger and have been replaced with smaller ones, or the kennels were built in anticipation of dogs that would grow to a larger size. The village in the Forbidden Woods was keeping something larger in those kennels, or was expecting something larger to eventually occupy them. Number 103 is a detail in the item pickup placement within the Forbidden Woods. Items in the forest that are placed off the main path, requiring exploration of dead ends and false routes to find, are placed with a specific quality of intentionality. They are not randomly distributed rewards for exploration. Several of them are arranged in deliberate patterns. 3 items in a triangle formation, 4 items in a cross formation, 2 items at precise mirror positions relative to a central tree. Someone placed items in the Forbidden Woods in geometric configurations. Not a game designer, but a character within the world who is organizing things in the forest according to a system of placement that has geometric logic. 104 is about the forbidden designation itself. The area is called the Forbidden Woods, and in the game's lore it was forbidden by the Healing Church. But the prohibition is clearly old. The settlements within the forest, the worn paths, the established river access, all point to human presence in the forest for far longer than a prohibition would allow. The prohibition was either recent and ineffective, or old and consistently violated, or applied specifically to certain routes through the forest rather than the forest as a whole. One possible reading is that the Forbidden Woods were forbidden to reach one specific destination within them, and the prohibition was applied to the whole area as a cover for restricting access to one particular thing. Easter egg 105 is in the fungal growth visible on structures in the laboratory section of the Forbidden Woods. The underground laboratory is covered in fungal or mycological growth, a white web-like material spread across walls, equipment, and floors. This material is bioluminescent, producing a faint light. The bioluminescence is not constant. It pulses very slowly, at a rate that is consistent with a living biological process. The fungal growth in the Forbidden Woods laboratory is alive, growing, and actively metabolizing. It has been there long enough to cover the entire laboratory in a dense mat. Whatever it is feeding on in the abandoned laboratory has sustained it for the years since the laboratory was vacated. Number 106 is about the poisonous plants in the Forbidden Woods. The forest contains areas where poison pools on the ground, a gameplay hazard represented visually as thick plant growth that produces toxic sap. These hazard zones are concentrated in specific sections, not uniformly distributed. If you map the poison zones, they cluster around two types of locations: animal burrows and building foundations. Poison concentrations near animal burrows is a real ecological phenomenon where certain toxic plants thrive in disturbed soil. But poison concentrations near building foundations suggest the buildings themselves are causing or concentrating the toxic plant growth. Whatever was in those buildings or done in those buildings has altered the soil chemistry in a way that specifically promotes the growth of toxic plants. Easter egg 107 is in the stone formations in the deep forest. In the deepest accessible sections of the Forbidden Woods, beyond the standard exploration path, there are stone formations that are clearly not natural. They are stacked, shaped, and positioned with an intentionality that suggests human construction. But they are not architectural in any style consistent with Yharnam or the Healing Church. The stonework is crude and old, using techniques that predate formal architecture. These formations are ancient, predating the city, predating the church, predating the history that the game's lore directly addresses. Someone was in the Forbidden Woods long before Yharnam existed, and they built things there. 108 is the final Easter egg in the Forbidden Woods chapter, and it is about the exit. When you finally exit the Forbidden Woods toward Bergenwerth, the forest behind you as you leave looks different from how it looked when you were inside it. The canopy, viewed from outside, is denser and taller than the interior experience suggested. From outside the forest, the Forbidden Woods appears to be a wall of old-growth trees with a canopy high enough to obscure the moon. From inside, the moonlight reaches the ground, gaps appear in the canopy, and the interior feels navigable. The forest is larger on the inside than it appears from outside. You cannot see how big it actually is until you have already left it. Chapter 7. Bergenwerth. Bergenwerth is a college, the intellectual origin of everything that happened to Yharnam, and it is one of the most architecturally tranquil locations in the game. This is intentional. The place that set all of this in motion is peaceful. It has a lake, a building covered in ivy, and a scholar who sits in a rocking chair. Easter egg 109 is the rocking chair itself. Master Willem, the elderly scholar in the chair, rocks at a specific rate. If you time the rocking, you will find it consistent across all observations, not randomized or variable. It is a constant rhythm. The rocking chair has been moving at this rhythm for long enough that the floorboards beneath it have worn grooves corresponding to the arc of the chair's movement. The chair is worn into the floor, which means Willem has been sitting in that chair, rocking at that rate, for a very long time. Number 110 is about Willem's eyes. Master Willem has had his eyes replaced with additional eyes in a process consistent with Bergenwerth's research into the insight provided by Great One Eyes. This is visible in his appearance, which is dramatically different from a normal human face, but the extra eyes on Willem's body are in a state that suggests they were added at different times. Some appear more integrated into his physiology, older implantations. Others appear newer, less settled. Willem has been gradually, over a long period, adding eyes to himself, continuing the process of self-modification even in his current state, sitting on his porch overlooking the lake. 111 is in the layout of the Bergenwerth College building. The building is a single large structure, but it has been added to over time. The original construction, visible in the oldest sections of the building where the stonework is different, was a simple, rectangular structure. Wings have been added at different times, and each wing has a different architectural character, reflecting different periods and different priorities. The wing that contains the research materials has higher ceilings and larger windows than the original building. The wing that contains the student quarters, smaller and less well lit, was built later and more cheaply. Bergenwerth grew as its funding and ambitions grew, and the architecture preserves the history of that growth. Easter egg 112 is in the lake visible from the Bergenwerth porch. The lake is very still. Water in an open outdoor environment is typically disturbed by wind, by insects, by wildlife. The lake at Bergenwerth is perfectly still in a way that real water rarely achieves. Nothing moves in it. Nothing disturbs its surface. The lake's stillness is either a consequence of the lake's depth eliminating surface turbulence from wind, or a consequence of something about the lake's composition making its surface tension abnormally high, or a consequence of nothing living in or near the lake being willing to enter or disturb its water. The lake is still because everything around it has learned not to touch it. Number 113 is about the books in Bergenwerth's library. The college has a library, and the books on the shelves are organised by a cataloguing system that is visible in the way the books are grouped and labelled. The system appears to be thematic, grouping by subject area. If you trace the subject groupings across the shelves, the library tells a story about the progression of the college's research interests over time. The earliest section, the oldest books, covers natural science and classical philosophy. The middle section moves into medicine and biology. The final section, the most recently added and the most densely packed, covers topics that do not have ordinary academic names. The final section is where the conventional library ends and something else begins. 114 is a light detail in the Bergenwerth interior. The windows in Bergenwerth's main hall admit moonlight at a specific angle that illuminates the centre of the hall during nighttime. The lighting effect is too precise to be accidental. The windows are positioned so that their combined illumination converges on a single point in the middle of the hall floor, a point where the floorboards have a distinctive marking, a circle set into the wood of the floor, perhaps a decorative inlay or a structural element. On the nights when the moon is positioned correctly, that circular marking on the floor is lit by a focused column of moonlight. Bergenwerth's hall was designed as an astronomical instrument, calibrated to illuminate a specific point in its floor at a specific lunar position. Easter egg 115 is in the spider enemies at Bergenwerth. These enemies are among the most disturbing in the game, combining human and arachnid anatomy in ways that are anatomically coherent rather than random. The spiders in Bergenwerth move as if they understand their anatomy, using their hybrid limbs with a proficiency that implies they have had time to adapt to their new form. They are not recent transformations. They move comfortably on the ceiling, the walls, the floor, with equal ease. The Bergenwerth students who became these creatures have had time to learn their new bodies. They have been this way long enough to master it. Number 116 is about the note visible in the later areas of Bergenwerth. There is a note on a desk in the upper section of the building that can be read by the player, and it discusses a specific experiment and its results, but the handwriting on the note changes partway through. The early paragraphs are in a careful academic script. The final paragraph is in a different handwriting, less controlled, written faster. 2 different people wrote this note, or one person wrote it at 2 different times, and their handwriting had changed significantly in the intervening period. The change in handwriting at the end of the note corresponds to the point in the text where the subject matter shifts from observation to personal experience. Whoever finished this note was writing from a different state than the person who began it. 117 is in the lunarium. the location at the top of Byrgenwerth, where the fight with Rom the vacuous spider takes place. The lunarium is an astronomical observation room, designed to view the moon and stars through specific apertures in the roof. The apertures are positioned at angles corresponding to specific celestial events. One aperture, the largest and most prominently positioned, would admit a beam of light from the moon during a specific lunar phase, and that beam would fall directly on the center of the circular pool in the floor of the lunarium. The pool is where Rom is found. Rom is positioned in the exact spot where the moonlight converges during the appropriate lunar phase. Rom is not just guarding something in the lunarium. Rom is sitting in the moonlight's focal point, at Byrgenwerth's most sacred astronomical position. Easter egg 118 is in what Rom's presence conceals. In the game's lore, Rom the vacuous spider is maintaining a veil that prevents certain truths from being perceived. When Rom is defeated and the veil drops, the world changes, the blood moon appears, and things that were hidden become visible. The lunarium, the site of this veil, is astronomically pointed at the moon. The veil that Rom maintains is generated from a room that was designed specifically to focus the moon's light into a single point. One possible reading is that the veil is itself made of moonlight, concentrated at the lunarium's pool, and Rom is the anchor point for this concentrated moonlight veil. Defeating Rom is not just killing a boss, it is breaking the lens. Number 119 is a detail in the exterior of Byrgenwerth overlooking the lake. The college has a dock extending into the lake, and the dock has a rowboat tied to it. The rowboat is in good repair. It has not rotted or sunk. The rope tying it to the dock is intact. The rowboat has been maintained, or the lake's conditions have prevented its decay. The rowboat at the Byrgenwerth dock is ready to be used. It goes somewhere. The lake has another shore, or an island, or a specific position on the water that was worth visiting by rowboat. Whatever is at the other end of that rowboat's route is not accessible in the game, but the boat's existence, its maintained condition, and its readiness all assert that there is somewhere worth going on this lake. 120 is about the colour of the ivy on Byrgenwerth's exterior. The building is covered in ivy, and ivy in general is green. The ivy on Byrgenwerth is green in its majority, but in specific sections, particularly around the windows of the research wing, the ivy has gone dark, almost black, while remaining alive. Dark ivy on a building is a sign of environmental stress or a chemical process affecting the plant. The ivy around the research windows has been affected by what came out of those windows over years of work. The fumes, vapours, or effluents of Byrgenwerth's research have stained and altered the plant life growing on the outside of the research wing without killing it, producing a dark living margin around those windows. Easter egg 121 is in the floor of the Byrgenwerth lecture room. The lecture room has a tiered floor, stepped seating as in a university amphitheatre, and at the centre front of the room there is a lectern. The lectern is positioned correctly for delivery of a lecture, and the sightlines from each tier to the lectern are good. This is a functioning lecture room by standard academic design. But the sightlines from the lectern to the students' positions are also very precise. From the lectern, you can see every seat in the room. The lectern position was designed for equal visibility in both directions. Every student could see the lecturer, and the lecturer could see every student. Observation was mutual and complete in Byrgenwerth's lecture room. Number 122 is in the personal effects of Master Willem, visible around his position on the porch. Near his rocking chair, there are several objects placed within his reach. Among them are items that suggest ongoing daily activity. A cup, materials for writing, a blanket for warmth. These items suggest Willem is being attended to. Someone is bringing him things, maintaining his comfort. Even now, in the current state of Yharnam, someone is still caring for Master Willem in a functional way. He is not being left to die on his porch. Whoever is providing for him is still present in or around Byrgenwerth unseen by the player, and still considers the care of this elderly, radically altered scholar worth their continued attention. 123 is about the cobwebs in Byrgenwerth's interior. The building is dusty, and many surfaces have accumulated the dust and cobweb patterns of abandonment. But the cobwebs are not uniformly distributed. They cluster in the corners and on the ceilings of rooms that have been sealed for the longest time, but they are conspicuously absent from certain surfaces in the research wing. Specifically, the desks and workbenches in the research areas are free of dust and cobwebs in a way that is inconsistent with years of abandonment. These work surfaces have been cleared recently enough that dust has not yet reaccumulated. Someone has been using the research workbenches in the Byrgenwerth research wing within a time frame that predates your arrival by a short period. Easter egg 124 is in the specific titles of Byrgenwerth as an institution. It is called a college, but it operates more like a research institute or a private laboratory than a conventional educational institution. There are no records of students beyond the scholars, who are named in law. There is no administrative structure, no registrar, no formal academic hierarchy beyond the principal and the scholars. Byrgenwerth was a college in name, a designation that conferred academic legitimacy and access to resources without the institutional apparatus of a real college. It was a private research operation with a college's name. The choice to call it a college was a choice about public presentation rather than actual function. Number 125 is about Carol, the transcriber associated with Byrgenwerth's runes. Carol was a student at Byrgenwerth who had the ability to hear the sounds of the Great Ones and transcribe them into the Carol runes used throughout the game. This ability to hear inhuman sound and convert it into notation is not a standard human ability. Carol was specifically capable of a type of perception that should not be humanly possible. And yet Carol was at Byrgenwerth, learning among ordinary scholars, presumably before the research into Great One contact reached its most extreme stages. Carol arrived at Byrgenwerth already different, already capable of hearing something others could not hear. The ability that made Carol famous was not produced by Byrgenwerth, it was brought there. The 126th Easter egg, which closes the Byrgenwerth chapter, is in the relationship between Byrgenwerth and everything that came after it. Byrgenwerth preceded the healing church. The church grew from Byrgenwerth's research. Cainhurst's destruction was a consequence of Byrgenwerth-connected ambitions. The Forbidden Woods were forbidden because of Byrgenwerth's experiments. Old Yharnam was burned because of what Byrgenwerth's research unleashed. Virtually every major event in Bloodborne's history traces back to decisions made at this quiet college by a lake. And the college itself is remarkably calm. The peace of Byrgenwerth, the ivy, and the lake, and the rocking chair is the peace of a place that has already done its damage. It does not need to be chaotic. It set everything in motion a long time ago, and it has been sitting quietly ever since. Chapter 8. Yharnam, Unseen. Village. Yharnam is a place that the game shows you very briefly early on, pulls you into through a kidnapping mechanic, and then reveals fully after you defeat Rom and the blood moon rises. It is a village that was consumed by the choir's experiments and now exists as a permanent night of abduction, a place where the School of Mensis uses bell women to summon souls into its territory. Easter egg 127 is in the name. Yharnam translates, loosely and by speculation, from the game's constructed language to something in the range of the village of the unseen. The unseen village. A place hidden, a place kept secret, and the primary mechanic of its abduction system, the bell ringers who pull you into the village, is based on the concept of being taken without warning. Yharnam is an Easter egg in its own name. It is an unseen village that drags you into it without asking. Number 128 is in the early kidnapping version of Yharnam. When you're first taken there by the kidnapping mechanic, before Rom is defeated, the village appears in a specific state that is different from its fully revealed state later. In the early version, the enemies are in specific positions and configurations. In the later, post-Blood Moon version, many of these configurations have changed. Enemies have moved, or new enemies are present, or routes are differently blocked. The village at both times is continuous, the same physical space, but the events that happened between your first and second visit are visible in the environmental changes. Something happened in Yharnam between your first and second visit that rearranged its population. 129 is about the church in Yharnam. The village has a church building that is distinct from the healing church architecture elsewhere in Yharnam. It uses elements of the healing church style, but with specific differences that suggest it was built for a different congregation, or at a different period, or under different ecclesiastical authority. The church in Yharnam was not built by the standard healing church architectural program. It was built by a faction within the church, the School of Mensis, and the differences in its design are the visual signatures of that faction. Every architectural choice the Mensis faction made in this church was chosen to reflect their specific interpretation of the church's mission. Easter egg 130 is in the altar of the Yharnam church. The altar has an object on it that is not a standard religious object. In the center of the altar, there is a device, a mechanical device, visibly different from the devotional objects that would typically be found on a church altar. It has components that are functional rather than symbolic. The altar of the Yharnam church has a research instrument where a devotional object should be. The School of Mensis used this church altar as a workbench for their experiments, placing their apparatus in the most sacred position in the building. The altar, either as a statement about the equivalence of research and worship, or as a practical decision to use the most visible and accessible flat surface in the building. Number 131 is in the behavior of the bell-ringing women in Yharnam. These enemies are the mechanism that summons additional enemies into the area, and they ring their bells with a very specific posture. If you observe a bell ringer before alerting her, she stands in a specific orientation, facing a specific direction rather than randomly. The direction she faces before she begins ringing is always consistent for each individual bell ringer. She always faces the same way, and the direction she faces corresponds to something specific in the village's geography. The bell ringers in Yharnam are oriented toward the building at the center of the village, the largest structure, the building most associated with Mensis activities. They are always pointed at the source of their power. 132 is in the cells visible in Yharnam. The village has cells, lockable rooms where people were kept, and several of these cells contain items that the person can find there left behind. The items in the cells are personal objects, not weapons or equipment. They are objects of sentiment. A doll, a piece of cloth, a coin. Whatever was being taken from the world and brought to Yharnam through the abduction system, the people themselves understood they were being taken, and the things they left in their cells are the things they held onto as long as they could. Easter egg 133 is in the wall texture of the deeper sections of Yharnam. In the underground areas beneath the village, accessible in the post-Blood Moon version, the walls are not stone. They are something organic, a material that has the appearance of dried biological matter. Perhaps specifically, the dried remains of a very large amount of some kind of fluid that has been there for a long time and has solidified into a surface. The underground walls of Yharnam are lined with dried biofluids, and within those surfaces there are embedded shapes, forms that are partially visible, suggesting that things were dissolved into these walls rather than that the walls were built around them. Number 134 is about the 1/3 amygdalas visible in post-Blood Moon Yharnam. The amygdala are Great One entities that appear throughout the game world after the Blood Moon rises, suddenly visible in locations they were always occupying but previously invisible. In Yharnam specifically, the amygdalas are extraordinarily large, pressing against buildings, crouching in streets, their presence almost too big for the spaces they occupy. The amygdalas in Yharnam are not a new arrival. They were always here, in these streets, occupying these spaces. The village was built in a location that was already populated by multiple amygdalas, and the school of Mensis was aware of this and chose this location for their village, specifically because of that proximity to great ones. 135 is in the layout of the underground pathways beneath Yharnam. The underground section of the village is a network of corridors and rooms that does not reflect an obvious, constructed purpose. The rooms are irregularly shaped and positioned, connected by passages that do not follow logical architectural planning. This underground section was not purpose-built. It grew. The tunnels in Yharnam's underground were expanded progressively, each section added as the need arose, without overall planning, producing a labyrinthine result. The school of Mensis dug its way through the ground beneath the village, section by section, following whatever they were looking for, or following the growth of whatever was producing the organic material on the walls. Easter egg 136 is in the iron cage carriages, in the post-Blood Moon version of Yharnam. There are cage contraptions visible in the area that appear to have been used to transport or confine things. The cages are large, big enough to hold something considerably larger than a human. They have not been used in some time, given their rust and accumulated dust, but they are still mechanically functional, their hinges and locks intact. These cages were not built for the abduction of individual people. They were built for the transport of something much bigger, something the school of Mensis needed to move from one place to another, and needed to contain during transport. The cages exist because something very large was being moved through Yharnam. Number 137 is about the music that plays in Yharnam. The area's background music shifts between phases, the kidnapping phase and the post-Blood Moon phase, and the two musical states have a relationship that is more than simple contrast. The music of the kidnapping phase contains, buried in its lower register, a melodic motif that is a slowed and distorted version of the same motif that appears prominently in the post-Blood Moon music. The two states of Yharnam are musically connected at a deeper level than just representing the same location. The same note sequence runs through both, and the sequence in the later state is the earlier version accelerated and clarified. The place was always heading toward its revealed form. The music was always the same song. 138 is in the specific architecture of the bridge connecting the main village area to the church section. The bridge has a design element that is unusual for Yharnam architecture in general. It has a gate in its centre that can be operated from both sides, not just one. Most gates and doors in the game are control mechanisms designed to allow or prevent passage from one specific direction. This bridge gate controls passage in both directions equally. Both sides of the bridge were considered capable of trying to cross, and both sides were considered worth controlling access to. The church section and the main village section of Yharnam regarded each other as threats requiring mutual containment. Easter egg 139 is in the clothing of the dead NPCs visible in Yharnam. The people who were brought to Yharnam and have not survived are dressed in a variety of different styles, not uniform clothing. They were abducted from different social classes, different occupations, different areas of Yharnam. Among the visible dead, there is a merchant, a labourer, someone in a hunter's partial garb, someone in formal wear. The abduction was not selective by class or occupation. The school of Mensis took whoever their bell ringers could reach. The dead in Yharnam are a cross-section of Yharnam's population. Number 140 is about the moon over Yharnam. In the post-Blood Moon phase, when Yharnam is fully revealed, the blood moon above the village has a different visual quality than the blood moon visible from other areas. In Yharnam, the moon appears to be pulsating, Its light intensity varies rhythmically, brighter and dimmer in a slow cycle, as if the moon itself is breathing. From any other area of the game, the blood moon is an intense, static red. In Yharnam, it moves. The nightmare of Mensis, the dimension adjacent to Yharnam and linked to the moon's influence, is closest to Yharnam of any earthly location. The moon is breathing in Yharnam because the distance between the physical world and the nightmare is shortest here. 141 is in the pebble enemies of Yharnam. These enemies, the small crawling things that appear in large numbers in the underground section, move together in a way that, when observed without attacking, resembles a school of fish or a murmuration of birds. They move as a group with emergent collective behaviour, responding to each other's positions, forming shapes, splitting and rejoining. This behaviour in enemies that are individually simple suggests a kind of collective intelligence, a hive mind operating at a low level. The individual pebble creatures are not individually intelligent, but together they behave in a way that implies something coordinating them, something that is aware of where each member of the group is and is adjusting the collective movement. Easter egg 142 is about what you can see from inside the cage structure in the nightmare of Mensis that is adjacent to Yharnam. Within the nightmare, there is a cage in which a brain entity is imprisoned, and from the exterior of that cage you can see lights visible in the bars. These lights have no source within the cage itself. They appear to radiate from the brain entity, which is barely visible within the cage. The brain is producing light. The entity imprisoned in the cage in the nightmare of Mensis generates a luminescence that is visible through the bars, and the colour of that light matches the colour of the blood moon over Yharnam precisely. The imprisoned brain and the blood moon are connected. Number 143 is about the item pickup placement in Yharnam that is exclusive to the post-blood moon version. When the blood moon rises and Yharnam is fully revealed, new items appear in the environment that were not present in the kidnapping phase version. These items appear in specific locations, placed as if by someone who arrived after the blood moon. But no new character enters Yharnam after the blood moon in any way the game depicts. The items that appear in post-blood moon Yharnam were placed by the blood moon itself. The transformation of the world that the blood moon represents was specific enough and material enough to leave physical objects behind at specific locations. The 144th Easter egg closes the Yharnam chapter. It is about the relationship between Yharnam as a physical location and the nightmare of Mensis as an adjacent dimension. The game presents them as connected, close enough that crossing between them is possible under specific circumstances. But the specific physical connection between the two, the architectural or geological point where the boundary between the physical world and the nightmare is thinnest in Yharnam, is never shown directly. It is implied by the presence of the amygdalas, by the brain cage, by the bell ringer's orientation. The exact point where Yharnam bleeds into the nightmare is not a room or a gate. It is a condition, a state of accumulated proximity that the entire village exists within, rather than a single crossing point. Chapter 9. Lecture Building. The lecture building is one of Bloodborne's stranger locations, accessed through a hunter's dream transition, existing between the waking world and the nightmare realms. It is not fully in either, it is the threshold. Easter egg 145 is in the name itself, and what it implies about Bloodborne's world building. A lecture building implies students, teachers, a curriculum, a structured program of knowledge transfer. The lecture building in Bloodborne is where you go between the waking world and the nightmare. The threshold between reality and nightmare is an academic institution. The game is suggesting that understanding, that learning, that the structured acquisition of knowledge is what creates the passage between ordinary reality and what lies beyond it. You go to school to get to the nightmare. Number 146 is in the chalkboards in the lecture building. The chalkboards in the lecture halls of this building have writing on them that is visible, but not always legible, from normal gameplay angles. If you position the camera carefully to read the chalkboard text, you will find equations, diagrams, and written text that are oriented toward a specific form of research. The diagrams include what appear to be cross-sections of biological structures that are not human anatomy. They are anatomical diagrams of something that has multiple of each major organ, arranged in a symmetry that no vertebrate life form would have. The lecture building was teaching people about the anatomy of something that has not been formally described. 147 is about the students. The lecture building is populated by students, specific enemy types that are former Bjergenwerth and research students who have undergone transformation. But the students in the lecture building are in an earlier stage of transformation than the students visible in Bjergenwerth. This suggests the lecture building was operational more recently than Bjergenwerth, or that the transformation process in the lecture building proceeded more slowly. The students here still have more of their human form intact. Whatever was happening in the lecture building's classrooms was proceeding more gradually than what happened to the Bjergenwerth students in the deeper college. Easter egg 148 is in the floor plan of the lecture building as a whole. The lecture building has 2 floors accessed in the game through 2 separate doors from the Hunter's Dream. The 2 floors do not share an internal staircase. To go from one floor to the other, you must return to the dream and re-enter through the other door. The lecture building is not internally coherent. Its floors do not connect to each other within the building itself. This architectural impossibility is consistent with the lecture building existing in a threshold space between dream and reality. The rules of architecture do not fully apply to a building that exists in between. Number 149 is in the smell of the lecture building communicated through visual cues. The visual texture of the lecture building, old papers, dusty desks, the specific amber colouring of the light through dirty windows, communicates the specific sensory character of an old building that has been sealed for a long time with papers and biological material inside. Old biological material in a sealed space produces a specific odour profile, and the visual design of the lecture building replicates the conditions that would produce that smell with enough precision that the room feels identifiably smelly. The lecture building smells, visually, like a building where something biological has been decomposing for years in a sealed space. 150 is about the windows of the lecture building. The windows admit light that is inconsistent with any observable time of day. The light through the lecture building's windows has qualities of both daytime and nighttime simultaneously, a combination of warm light and cool darkness that does not occur naturally. The windows of the lecture building open onto something that is neither day nor night. They open onto the space between. You cannot see out of the lecture building windows clearly. Whatever is outside is not a sky or a city. It is the conceptual space that the building occupies. Easter egg 151 is in the giant amygdala visible through the lecture building windows. From specific windows in the lecture building, you can see an amygdala of colossal size, larger than any encountered elsewhere in the game, positioned outside the building at an enormous distance. This amygdala is not interactable and does not appear in any other context in the game. It is simply visible from certain windows of the lecture building as a massive form in the threshold space outside. The lecture building's location between worlds puts it adjacent to something that is too large to encounter in any world individually. The threshold space has larger residents than either world on its own. Number 152 is about the mannequins in the lecture building. The building contains student mannequins, physical models used in anatomy and physiology classes, positioned in specific rooms. These mannequins are in their original positions from when the building was actively used. Their positioning within the rooms suggests they were arranged for specific demonstrations, not stored randomly. The mannequins of the lecture building were placed for teaching purposes, and whoever placed them was teaching about things that required physical, three-dimensional models for explanation. The subject matter of those demonstrations, the things that required mannequins to explain, was complex enough and unusual enough that conventional illustrations or diagrams were insufficient. 153 is in the library section of the lecture building. The library has books organised in a system, and the system here is different from Bergenwerth's. Where Bergenwerth's library organised by subject area, the lecture building's library organises by access level. The books closest to the reading tables are marked with what appear to be colour-coded labels, and the colours progress outward from the tables toward the walls and the higher shelves. The books near the walls and on the upper shelves are in a different colour category than those accessible at the tables. The lecture building's library organised its knowledge by how restricted it was, placing the most accessible knowledge at the centre and the most restricted at the periphery. To read the most restricted books, you would need to know to go to the edges. Easter egg 154 is in the handwriting comparison between the chalkboard text and the note items found in the lecture building. The chalkboard text is in a clean, practiced academic hand. The notes found as item pickups in the building are in a different hand, more hurried and less formal, but there is a specific phrase that appears in both, the same words written in both the chalkboard style and the note-taking style. The phrase appears in a different context in each location, but it is the same phrase. The person who wrote on the chalkboards and the person who wrote the notes use the same phrase, either one person in two different contexts or two people who are taught the same phrase as a significant term. Number 155 is about the student enemy's attack behaviour. The lecture building students are aggressive, and their attacks have a specific quality that distinguishes them from the beast enemies elsewhere. They attack in ways that suggest they know what they're doing. Their movements have the quality of trained gestures, the kind of specific attack patterns you learn through practice. These students learn to attack. Whatever they were being taught in the lecture building included instruction in physical techniques that they now use in their transformed state. The students of the lecture building are applying their education in their altered form. 156 is in the single bookshelf in the lecture building that is locked. Among the many bookshelves, one has a visible locking mechanism, a bar across the shelf front that has been padlocked. The padlock is not a puzzle. You cannot open it. The locked shelf simply exists, a section of the library permanently sealed from access, present in the building, but inaccessible for the duration of the game. The knowledge on that shelf has never been available to any player of Bloodborne. It is sealed away in a building between worlds, and the game gives you no key and no means of opening it. The locked shelf is one of the most resonant Easter eggs in Bloodborne, a secret inside a secret space that has no solution. Easter egg 157 is in the door at the end of the second floor of the lecture building. The door at the far end of the second floor opens into a fog gate that leads to the nightmare frontier. On the outside of this door, before the fog gate, there is a small object placed on the floor, directly in front of the door. It is a note. The note is brief and contains text to the effect of a warning or a farewell. Someone placed that note in front of the door to the nightmare frontier and then went through. The note is not addressed to anyone in particular. It is placed in a location where someone who is about to go through the same door would see it, and the message suggests the person who wrote it did not expect to come back. Number 158 is about the sound of silence in the lecture building. The lecture building is one of the quietest areas in Bloodborne. The ambient sound is minimal, a very low environmental hum, and the rooms have a deadened acoustic quality, where sounds you make do not echo much. This acoustic quality is inconsistent with the building's architecture. Large, hard-walled rooms produce reverberation. The lecture building absorbs sound rather than reflecting it. This could be acoustic treatment, deliberate sound dampening in the walls and ceiling, or it could be a property of the threshold space the building occupies, where sound does not propagate the same way it does in either of the adjacent worlds. 159 is in the door to the first floor, from the Hunter's Dream. Exiting through this door takes you to Yharnam. The spatial logic of this transition places the lecture building as an intermediate space between the Hunter's Dream and the waking world's most nightmare-adjacent location. The spatial sequence is Hunter's Dream, lecture building first floor, Yharnam. The Hunter's Dream leads to a threshold, which leads to the most nightmare-proximate waking location. The path the game uses follows a gradient of increasing proximity to the nightmare, and the lecture building is precisely at the midpoint of that gradient. Easter egg 160 is in the scale of the lecture building's rooms relative to each other. The lecture halls are large, sized for many students. The office spaces and study rooms are personal-sized. For one or two, the library is in between. But the largest room in the building is not a lecture hall or a library. It is a room accessed through a series of corridors that most players use as a passing space, not a destination. This largest room has no obvious purpose. It is too large for the study functions of the surrounding rooms and too sparsely furnished for a lecture hall. It is just large and mostly empty, with a floor that has been cleared rather than simply unused. Something was in this room that required a great deal of space and has since been removed. Number 161 is about the note placement at transitions. Every door in the lecture building that leads to a different world, either the dream or the nightmare, has a piece of paper placed near it. These papers are not always readable as full item notes. Some are just visible as paper objects on the floor. But the consistency of paper appearing near every transition door suggests a practice, a habit of documentation at thresholds, practiced by someone who understood the significance of crossing between worlds and chose to mark each crossing with writing. The lecture building's threshold doors are all marked with writing. Someone was keeping a record of every passage. The 162nd Easter egg, which closes the lecture building chapter, is in the building's apparent abandonment versus its actual state. Every surface suggests abandonment. The dust, the stillness, the silence, the unchanged position of everything. But the chalkboards are not erased. The notes are still legible. The books are not water damaged, despite the building's age. The mannequins are upright. Nothing in the lecture building has decayed. An abandoned building in a threshold space between worlds does not decay in the way ordinary abandoned buildings do. The lecture building will remain exactly as it is indefinitely. The lesson on the chalkboard will remain legible. The locked shelf will remain locked. The note in front of the nightmare door will remain exactly where it was placed. The threshold preserves what it contains. Chapter 10. Nightmare Frontier. The Nightmare Frontier is one of the more explicitly alien areas in Bloodborne, accessed through the lecture building and existing within a nightmare dimension. It has an enormous, open sky, a sulphurous outdoor environment, and a geography that does not follow normal spatial logic. Easter egg 163 is in the sky of the Nightmare Frontier. The sky above this area is unlike any other sky in Bloodborne. It is not the blood moon sky of Yharnam, and it is not the ordinary night sky of Yharnam. It is a sky that appears to be in transition, with colour gradients and cloud formations that are not stable, that appear to be moving through states. The sky of the Nightmare Frontier is not a fixed sky. It is processing. Whatever the nightmare dimension is doing, it is doing it visibly in the sky overhead. Number 164 is in the terrain of the Nightmare Frontier. The ground in this area is covered with what appears to be a fungal or coral-like growth, a natural material that exists somewhere between mineral and biological. This material, covers the terrain in irregular formations, and within those formations there are shapes that are recognizable as former structures, buildings, fences, road surfaces, all consumed by this material and incorporated into its growth. The Nightmare Frontier is a landscape that has been growing over the evidence of a prior civilization. Whatever was here before the nightmare took hold is now partially visible beneath the material that has grown over it. 165 is in the patches of poison liquid visible throughout the Nightmare Frontier. These pools of poison are distributed throughout the area, and their distribution is not random. They appear more frequently in the lowest geographic points of the terrain, as liquid would. This is physically accurate, a nightmare dimension with physically accurate fluid behavior. The poison in the Nightmare Frontier follows gravity. It pools at the bottom of geographic depressions. This suggests the nightmare has consistent physics, at least in the sense of gravity and fluid dynamics, even though its geography, its sky, and its inhabitants do not follow normal rules. Easter egg 166 is in the enemy called the Nightmare Apostle. These enemies are spider-like Thumerian creatures that inhabit the frontier, and they have a specific behavior when they are not engaged with the player. In their passive state, before combat begins, they perform a repetitive motion with their forelegs that, if you watch carefully, mimics a writing gesture. The Nightmare Apostle enemies appear to be writing, inscribing something into the air with the tips of their forelegs in a repetitive pattern. This behavior is consistent across all Apostle enemies in the area. They are all writing the same thing, the same motion, repeated continuously in the frontier's open space. Number 167 is about the ruins visible in the Nightmare Frontier. The ruins in this area are of structures that use an architectural style consistent with Pthumerian construction, the ancient civilization that the Healing Church excavated in the Chalice dungeons. The ruins on the surface of the Nightmare Frontier are Pthumerian. The Nightmare Dimension contains the ruins of the civilization that the Healing Church was excavating underground. The Pthumerians have a presence in both the physical worlds underground and the Nightmare Dimension surface, which suggests the Thumerians had access to, or awareness of, or origin within, the Nightmare Dimension itself. 168 is in the positioning of the Patches, the spider NPC in the Nightmare Frontier. Patches appears in a pit within the frontier, and his presence here is consistent with his trickster character across the Soulsborne games. But his specific location in the Nightmare Frontier has a detail that is easy to miss because of how unpleasant the area around him is to navigate. The pit Patches occupies is not a natural depression. Its edges are too regular, its depth too consistent. It is a constructed pit, dug to specific dimensions. Patches did not fall into this pit by accident. He is in a constructed space that predates his presence there. Someone dug a pit in the Nightmare Frontier, and Patches found it and made it his home. Easter egg 169 is in the alien structures that appear at the edges of the navigable Nightmare Frontier map. At the visible but unreachable edges of the area, beyond the explorable terrain, there are large structures that do not match any architectural style visible elsewhere in the game. They are enormous, with proportions that suggest they were built for something much larger than a human. These structures exist at the edge of the nightmare and cannot be reached, but they are clearly there, built there, purposefully constructed at a scale that the player can never understand by getting closer. The Nightmare Frontier has architecture for something else at its edges, architecture built by or for inhabitants of the nightmare that are not encountered during the game. Number 170 is about the birds in the Nightmare Frontier. Unlike the crows of Yharnam and the Hemwick Watchers, the birds of the Nightmare Frontier are not recognizable as any real-world bird species. They have a form that is bird-like, wings and a general avian silhouette, but specific features that are distinctly wrong in ways that take a moment to identify. Their wing joints bend in an additional direction that bird wings do not. Their proportions shift in the distance, appearing larger when far away and smaller when close up. The birds of the nightmare frontier do not follow the visual rules that the birds of the waking world follow. They are what dreams think birds look like. 171 is in the specific toxic plants visible in the nightmare frontier. The plant life in this area includes species that appear in item descriptions for poison consumables in the game. The ingredients for certain specific poisons come from the nightmare frontier, but the plants do not appear to be cultivated or harvested. They grow wild, in abundance. The nightmare dimension has, in its wild state, species of plant that the waking world has only in cultivated, deliberately grown forms. The plants you have to deliberately grow or find in the physical world grow naturally and abundantly in the nightmare. The nightmare is generous with the things it considers natural. Easter egg 172 is in the sound design of the Nightmare Frontier's open sections. The ambient sound in the open areas of the frontier is dominated by wind, but the wind sound has qualities that real wind does not have. Real wind is broadband noise with natural variation. The wind in the Nightmare Frontier has a tonal quality, a consistent pitch beneath the broadband noise, that makes it sound less like atmospheric pressure, differential, and more like something producing the sound intentionally. The wind of the Nightmare Frontier is not an absence of music. It is music that is almost a sound. Number 173 is about the nightmare's topology. The Nightmare Frontier has an unusual spatial relationship with itself. Certain sections of the terrain, when mapped, do not connect in ways that are geometrically consistent. A path that goes consistently downhill arrives at a point that is at the same elevation as where you started. A series of turns that should bring you back to your origin point does not. The geography of the Nightmare Frontier is non-Euclidean. Its terrain does not follow the spatial rules that waking world terrain follows. The nightmare's space bends. 174 is in the amygdala boss of the Nightmare Frontier. The boss amygdala in this area differs from the amygdalas visible in Yharnam in one specific way that is easy to overlook because the boss is trying to kill you. The boss amygdala's face, visible at close range during the fight, has a specific expression that changes during different phases of the fight. In the early phase, the face is neutral. As the fight progresses and you do more damage, the face changes. The expression becomes something that is interpretable as interest or attention, or a kind of recognition. The amygdala in this boss fight is paying more attention to you the more you hurt it. It is becoming more aware of you specifically as the fight continues. Easter egg 175 is in what the amygdala drops. The reward for defeating the amygdala is an item associated with insight, with perception, with seeing things that are normally hidden. The boss of a nightmare dimension drops a reward for seeing. The game's logic here is tight. To get to the nightmare, you needed insight. To fight the boss of the nightmare, you needed awareness. And the boss rewards you for your perception with an item that represents perception. The Nightmare Frontier is a location where the game's metaphysical logic is most clearly expressed as a game mechanic. Number 176 is in the fog that appears in certain sections